Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Measuring What Counts, the Global Movement for Well-Being by Joe Stiglitz, Jean-Paul Fitoussi, and Martine Duran. And this is from the first chapter labeled Overview. The high-level expert group on the measurement of economic performance and social progress, also known as HLEG, builds on the analyses and recommendations of the 2009 Commission on the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress, also known as the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission, in highlighting the role of well-being metrics in policy and encouraging a more active dialogue among economic theory and statistical practice. The report makes explicit the often implicit assumptions hidden in statistical practices and their real-world consequences. Its central message is that what we measure affects what we do. If we measure the wrong thing, we will do the wrong thing. If we don't measure something, it becomes neglected, as if the problem didn't exist. There is no simple way of representing every aspect of well-being in a single number in the way GDP describes market economic output. This has led to GDP being used as a proxy for both economic welfare, like people's command over commodities, and general welfare, which also depends on people's attributes and non-market activities. GDP was not designed for this task. We need to move beyond GDP when assessing a country's health and complement GDP with a broader dashboard of indicators that would reflect the distribution of well-being in society and its sustainability across the social, economic, and environmental dimensions. Excuse me. The challenge is to make the dashboard small enough to be easily comprehensible, but large enough to summarize what we care about the most. The 2008 crisis and its aftermath illustrate why a change in perspective is needed. The GDP loss that followed the crisis was not the temporary one-off event predicted by conventional macroeconomic models. Its effects have lasted over time, suggesting that the crisis caused the permanent loss of significant amounts of capital. Not just machines and structures, but also hidden capital in the form of lower on-the-job training, permanent scars on young people entering the labor market during a recession, and lower trust in an economic system rigged to benefit a few. Different metrics, including better measurements of people's economic insecurity, could have shown that the consequences of the recession were much deeper than the GDP statistics indicated, and governments might have responded more strongly to mitigate the negative impacts of the crisis. If, on the basis of GDP, the economy is perceived to be well on the road to recovery, as many governments believed in 2010, one would not take the strong policy measures needed to support people's living conditions suggested by metrics that inform on whether most of the population still feels in recession. Nor would one take measures to bolster the safety net and social protection in the absence of metrics on the extent of people's economic insecurity. These failings in the policy responses to the crisis were compounded by overly focusing on the consequences of public spending and raising government's liabilities, when this spending could take the form of investment, increasing the assets in governments and countries' balance sheets. The same follows when measures of unemployment do not reflect the full extent of a country's unused labor resources. The beyond GDP agenda is sometimes characterized as anti-growth, but this is not the case. The use of a dashboard of indicators reflecting what we value as a society would have led, most likely, to stronger GDP growth than that actually achieved by most countries after 2008. This book also looks at progress in implementing the recommendations of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission since 2009, identifying areas that require increased focus by statistical agencies, researchers, and policymakers. The UN Sustainable Development Goals agreed by the international community in 2015 clearly go far beyond GDP. But their 169 policy targets and more than 200 indicators for global monitoring are too many to guide policies. Countries will have to identify their priorities within the broader UN agenda and upgrade their statistical capacities, which, even in developed countries, are insufficient to monitor whether the agreed-upon commitments are being met. The international community should invest in upgrading the statistical capacity of developing countries, especially in areas where country data are needed to assess global phenomena, such as climate change or the world distribution of income. Inequality in income and wealth has today a central role in policy discussions in ways it did not in 2009. But important progress is still needed in a range of areas, such as measuring what happens at both ends of the income distribution, integrating different data sources, and measuring the joint distribution of income, consumption, and wealth at the individual level. When looking at inequality, it's also important to look at differences between groups. These are called horizontal inequalities, at inequalities within households, and the way resources are shared and managed, which are especially important in the case of wealth. We should also look beyond inequality in outcomes to inequality of opportunity. Inequality of opportunity is even more unacceptable than inequality of outcomes. But the operational distinction between the two is fuzzy, as we don't observe all circumstances that shape people's outcomes and are independent of their efforts. The book Measuring What Counts by Joe Stiglitz and Friends. Thank you. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. Well, happy Thursday. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is not only having to deal with a massive coronavirus outbreak in the southeastern part of her state and little pockets scattered around, but she's also having to deal with a right-wing anti-quarantine revolt that it turns out is funded in part, or at least the organization that's pushing it is funded in part by the DeVos family. Oh, surprise, surprise. You know, Eric Prince and Betsy DeVos and all those wonderful people. In any case, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer last night in a tweet pointed out the enemy here is not each other. It's not, you know, evil governors or good governors or anything like that. The enemy here is the virus. There is a virus that we need to pull together to respond to. I'm not fond of war metaphors, but this is what we have to. This is the challenge that we have to take on. But Donald Trump and the Republican Party, they don't see it that way, because solving the virus problem is going to require government help, and it's going to require science. And government and science are words that Republican politicians have been told over and over and over again since 1981 don't go in the mouths of Republican politicians. And why? Well, because since 1981, big tobacco, big guns, and big oil have funded the Republican Party. And none of those groups, big tobacco doesn't want you to know about science. They never have. They lied to us for decades. Big guns doesn't want you to know about science. I believe it's still illegal for the federal government to compile statistics on gun deaths, the old Dickey Amendment. And big oil obviously doesn't want you knowing about science because climate change, right? So you can't use those words if you're a Republican. So what are they left with? They're left with attacking and dividing and stoking hatred and division. I mean, this is basically all they've got. Somebody to blame. Oh, it's the World Health Organization. No, sorry, January 5th, the World Health Organization was warning the world, long before Donald Trump had any idea what the hell was going on. Well, actually, he knew. He was told by our intelligence agencies long before he took it seriously, long before he thought he would pay attention to the science or even the military. Blame the World Health Organization. Blame the governors. Blame the Chinese. Blame anybody and everybody you can in order to avoid taking responsibility. Because, you know, if you take responsibility, you'd have to work with scientists and you'd have to mobilize government. And why is that evil? Well, big oil doesn't like it, big guns don't like it, big tobacco doesn't like it, but also the billionaires who made all their money these ways, you know, Charles Koch and his little oil empire and on it goes, they don't like taxes. And if government is going to do things, including funding science, somebody's got to pay for it, which means the taxes on rich people have to go up because poor people don't even have damn jobs now. So now we've got this right-wing revolt spreading across Michigan, and there's one other state where it's popped up so far. And yeah, maybe Governor Whitmer should not have included the gardening section of stores in her order, or maybe she should have given it a specific carve-out. And I'm guessing she will very shortly. I mean, that's not an unreasonable thing. I'd like to grow food, right? Not unreasonable. Although it, you know, yesterday it was snowing in Michigan, so it's not quite, you know, we're not quite there yet, but in the next week or two, I mean, after all, it's the middle of April. Trump tweeted, Gretchen Half Whitmer is way in over her head, doesn't have a clue, and likes blaming everyone for her own ineptitude. And now we've got this group funded by Greg McNeely, a political advisor to the DeVos family, who have also contributed to this right-wing group. This is just absolutely nuts. And these guys yesterday in Michigan, the hashtag Michigan shutdown, they're walking around with Confederate flags. I love it. Somebody put together a meme about this that popped up over on DU. It says, the Confederate flags are a nice touch because they were also a bunch of losers who died fighting for something stupid. But Trump goes on to say that if states like Michigan don't reopen when he tells them to, and that may be this afternoon, but don't watch it. You can read about it in the newspapers. But if they don't reopen, well, this is what he said yesterday. He said, if we're not happy, we'll take very strong action against a state or governor if we're not happy with the job that governor is doing. We'll let them know about it. And as you know, we have very strong action that we can take, including a close down. So Trump's going to start shutting down states whose governors don't kiss his ass enough? It's just breathtaking. By the way, a couple of states, a couple of governors, and well, actually in this case, one city, San Francisco, and one state, Massachusetts, are doing something. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But I'm wondering how all this is affecting the politics of where you live. Are you seeing these revolts? You know, we had a couple of calls from Michigan yesterday, people talking about this. Have you seen some of their propaganda on Facebook or in other venues? What's the main message that they're promoting? You know, I get it, don't tread on me, freedom, 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 all that kind of stuff, but really? And I'm also wondering, what does quarantine look like in your home? Right? Are there any particular moments of joy that quarantine has brought you? I can tell you, for us, FaceTiming with our grandson has become like a major thing every day. And it's actually, I think we actually have more contact, and not physical contact, obviously, but we're more in touch with our grandson and our daughter than we were before. And that's kind of cool. And, and Louise and I have discovered the areas where living, constantly next to each other, the areas where it's easy for conflict to erupt, and we are, have figured out ways to work through that and resolve that conflict. And I think the consequence of that, and just speaking for myself, but I think Louise would say the same thing, has been that we've grown closer to each other. And we're going out of our way to be there for each other, to listen more carefully, to hug each other, to all that kind of stuff. How are you balancing work and kids? Are you able to work from home? Have you seen acts of kindness? These are some of the questions that the Huffington Post is asking, and I think they're really good questions. Have you seen any acts of kindness in your neighborhood or at your workplace? What are the most difficult things about your day, and what are the things that you really like? We've also, Louise and I have gotten real religious. Now, we've been pretty good about it over the years, but real religious about walking a couple of miles every day. We're fortunate that we live near a rural area where we can walk without coming into contact with people. A friend of mine in New York, I was talking with him yesterday, and he was like, it's hard to even go. Well, actually, a friend of mine in Portland I was talking with yesterday, and he said, you go out and there's some people who will give you space, and there's other people who just want to walk right by you. And and I'm like, yeah, I call them foxholes. They're asses who watch Fox News, and he called them Corona zombies. I love that goes to our engineer Dave. Corona zombies, Dave Fulton. So anyhow, what does the quarantine look like in your home? How are you dealing with this? And when we come back from the break, I want to tell you about what's going on in Massachusetts. There's just some astonishing, outrageous stuff going on coming out of the White House, around the world actually. There's a lot of news we're going to get to throughout this hour. In our second hour, Professor Richard Wolff will be with us. We're going to be talking about what is normal and how do we get there. In our third hour, Dahr Jamail is going to be with us about the changing earth, Indigenous voices from Turtle Island. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We have laid out a great show, lots of information, lots of fascinating stuff. You're going to enjoy it. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jessica in Riverside, Illinois. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wish information we get on cable would make it to prime time. I just wish more people really knew what goes on. In early March, Taiwan sent 1,000 masks to our country. Those masks were donated to the USA, and Taiwan handled their coronavirus incredibly well at this time. Their healthcare system was incredible. They're testing for the virus, and they level off early. But the idiot Trump does not give those million masks out to the front lines of our country. He personally uses them for the White House staff, not a hospital.
Right, 3,200 of them, yeah. They snatched them.
I think there were more than that even. But he uses them for
the number the New York Times reported this morning was 3,200 for the White House.
Oh, I heard a different number. That's whatever. But those masks should have went to the front lines. They're in the White House. They're not in a hospital.
Well, I think more than that, Jessica. It's not so much the outrage that Trump took 3,200 masks for the White House. Because that probably didn't consequentially impact the total. The outrage is that at the same time that the White House was getting masks and requiring people in the White House to wear masks, Donald Trump was going on TV saying, you don't need masks.
That's what I was about to say, too.
The hypocrisy is the mind-boggling part of this.
Yes, the idiot gets away with everything. I just wish that would be... I'm so happy you have your show. You are incredible. I don't think this news... No, honestly, I don't think stuff
somebody's got to talk back to these SOBs. I'm with you. Jessica, I need to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for raising a really important issue. It's great to hear from you. Chris in Galmy, Missouri. Hey, Chris, what's up?
I think that they're taking advantage of these disasters to run the suckers off. Run out the little man. Get rid of the little business. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're going to see a lot of big businesses buying a lot of small businesses over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And they did the same thing with 9/11. It's them. I think we should eat the rich people.
Soylent Green? Is that...
Yeah. You have a good one.
I think there's, they've got these bunkers in the Midwest that are in old missile silos that have been turned into multi-million-dollar hideout places where a bunch of rich people are. Some of the rich people have taken their yachts out on the ocean, on the seas, but they have the problem of needing a crew, and you don't know about the crew, and that's always a problem. I think this is probably a time of great anxiety for rich people because they can't grow their own food. Somebody's got to break there, or they don't. There may be a few who do, but I think that many of the Republican billionaire class are probably very, very worried that the help, right, is going to bring the germs into their houses, and I don't know if we should have some empathy for them, but it's got to be tough. Chris, thanks a lot for the call. That was a great one. And an excellent point. I'm going to rant about that in just a second. It's 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, broadcasting live from my home office, the very desk where I wrote the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment, and the hidden history of the Supreme Court and the betrayal of America, and the hidden history of the war on voting, right here at this desk. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, what is being done here in the United States? This is pretty remarkable. Angela Merkel in Germany is talking about slowly reopening parts of Germany. Now, how can she pull that off? How do you reopen an economy when, there's a deadly virus floating around? Well, it turns out that you do it through contact tracing and testing. Well, I guess the first step would be testing. You have to test people, not just who are symptomatic. You have to test everybody. And you don't just test them for an active infection. You test them for antibodies to find out if they've had an infection in the past, and therefore might be more immune to the disease and might actually be an appropriate person to be staffing, to be working in a restaurant or in a factory or whatever it may be, because, hey, they're not going to catch the virus from somebody sitting next to them because they've already had it. Well, Germany has been doing this for months. Germany was the first and most aggressive nation in Europe. It was January 6th, I believe, when the World Health Organization when China released the genome of the coronavirus, and the World Health Organization certified it and certified the standards for lab tests. Within a week or so, a German company had come up with a test that the World Health Organization certified and said that they would underwrite shipping to 60 different poor countries. And by the way, if any rich countries wanted it, they were available. This was first weeks of January. Donald Trump was like, no, everything's good. We're good. We don't need that. The New York Times, by the way, reporting yesterday afternoon, it's in today's Times, it's also on their digital edition right now, that had Trump shut down the country 2 weeks earlier than California and New York did, And they didn't shut down the country, they just shut down their states. But had Trump shut down the country 2 weeks before New York and California did, when it was obvious to public health experts in the United States and around the world that that's what needed to be done, 90% of the deaths that have occurred in the United States would not have happened. We have over 30,000 deaths in the United States. We would have 3,000, 27,000 people who are now dead because of Donald Trump's incompetence would still be alive, according to this New York Times study, had the country just shut down 2 weeks earlier. That's how fast this virus spreads. That's the kind of problem the 8 authoritarian follower governors, maybe sociopaths. I mean, I think this is a question that's worth asking. If a governor like this governor in South Dakota that Rachel Maddow's talking about every night, if a governor says, yeah, I know about the science, I read the science, I've heard all about the science, but I'm not going to open my state because we're Republicans and we don't do that. I'm following Donald Trump. I'm putting the economy ahead of people. If a governor says that, or her actions say that, is that a good and reliable indicator that that governor is probably a sociopath, a person who's incapable of empathizing with other human beings, who can't relate to people at the level of human to human, an automaton, a person with no conscience and no feeling? Or does it simply indicate that they're stupid? I think in the case of Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp in Florida and Georgia, I think you can safely say both. I don't know enough about the governor of South Dakota to make an evaluation. But anyhow, that's what Germany is doing. They're going to start slowly cracking the door open because they have that testing in place and they have the contact tracing in place. Well, now it's happening in both Massachusetts and San Francisco. Massachusetts, by the way, has a Republican governor, Charlie Baker. This a beautiful article in today's New York Times. Alexander Cross, a newly minted state public health worker, dialed a stranger's telephone number on Monday. This is by Ellen Berry. Her heart racing. It was Ms. Cross's first day as part of Massachusetts' fleet of contact tracers charged with tracking down people who've been exposed to the coronavirus as soon as possible and warning them. On her screen was the name of a woman from Lowell, Massachusetts. One person who has recently been diagnosed has been in contact with you, the script told her to say. Do you have a few minutes to discuss what that exposure might mean for you? 45 minutes later, Ms. Cross hung up the phone. They had giggled and commiserated. Her file was crammed with information. She was taking her first steps up a Mount Everest of cases. Massachusetts is the first state to invest in an ambitious contact tracing program, budgeting $44 million to hire 1,000 people like Ms. Cross. Similarly, San Francisco has established, this is as a result of Mayor London Breed in San Francisco, a new contact tracing program to identify everyone an infected patient has interacted with. The program will entail interviewing every newly infected person, this is from the Huffington Post, every newly infected patient in the city to establish the network of people they may have infected, and then informing those people that they could be possible carriers, all without revealing anyone's identity. Once a potentially infected person is contacted, they'll be able to text updates about their symptoms to the outreach workers managing their case for the next 2 weeks. This could be especially helpful in identifying asymptomatic carriers. Fascinating. Meanwhile, in the House of Representatives and the Senate, well, this is Senate Democrats, they want to budget $30 billion for a nationwide testing program. At the same time, Donald Trump is saying, we don't need no stinking testing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's 28 minutes past the hour. It's coming up on 20. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stop Being Reasonable, How We Really Change Our Minds by Eleanor Gordon Smith. This is from the introduction. Somewhere in the technological belt of California, where the only thing more precisely engineered than the software is the people, or maybe the people's teeth, lives an organization called the Center for Applied Rationality. For the low price of $3,900, the center will sell you a 4-day workshop on reasoning, during which participants eat, sleep, and take part in 9 hours of back-to-back activities together daily under one, presumably rationally designed roof. This year, like every other year, the center will receive hundreds of applications from people who want to attend because, as they put it, everyone I know is irrational and I want to fix them. These folks make for an easy punchline, a good group to laugh at. But it turns out many of us make a version of the same mistake when we think about persuasion. We think we know what it is to change our minds rationally, and the only question is why other people don't do it more often. The ideal mind change is calm. It reacts to reasoned argument. It responds to facts, not to our sense of self or the people around us. It resists the siren song of emotion. People like to talk about the public sphere, if there is such a thing, then its convex edge reflects this idealized image back at us. Think of the number of programs dedicated to the mind-changing magic of two sides saying opposite things. Meet the Press, State of the Union, Face the Nation. The branding of these things often bakes in a little reward. How brave I am for attending the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. How clever for my subscription to the Intelligence Squared debates. The proper way to reason, at least according to our present ideal, is to discard ego and emotion and step into a kind of disinfected argumentative operating theater where the sealed air conditioning vents stop any everyday fluff from floating down and infecting the sterilized truth. Years ago, I used to share this view. I'll tell you why, even though it will rightly want to make you take my lunch money. When I was in school, I was a champion debater, which was another way of saying I spent my weekends wearing a blazer and telling people in precisely timed intervals exactly how wrong they were. My teammates and I constructed arguments for 20 hours a week, putting premises in the crosshairs with the unblinking accuracy of people whose whole egos were on the line. We weren't bad either. Eventually, we made it to the World Championships in Qatar, where we wore blazers embroidered with the Australian coat of arms in gold and competed in what looked, in hindsight, like a scene in an apocalypse movie just before the purge begins. All of us in matching uniforms on fleets of white buses being shepherded through the desert haze to auditoriums where we would sit locked up together for an hour, surrounded by stopwatch-wielding officials. Debating left me with an attitude toward persuasion that was as precise as Euclidean geometry. Find the foundation, show why it's wrong. Buttress analysis with evidence. Emotion is for decorative flourishes only. Do not expect it to be load-bearing. Of course, I knew you could change minds by appealing to things like emotion or your opponent's sense of self, but doing that seemed kind of base. It felt nobly sportsmanlike to arm yourself with argument alone. It was the intellectual equivalent of turning up at dawn for your duel with your pistols shined and paces counted. It was how you were meant to fight. This perspective began to change after I produced a piece for the radio show This American Life in 2016. The idea had seemed simple. Turn around to my own catcallers, men who had wolf whistled or made sexual comments to me on the street, and try to reason them out of doing it again. I spent hours giving these men all the evidence, all the reasoning, all the fancy footwork with premises. But after dozens of conversations, I walked away defeated. Over and over again, they walked away from our conversations as sure as they'd ever been that it was okay to grab, yell at, or follow women on the street. These men didn't seem fundamentally irrational or unstuck from reality. In fact, in a funny sort of way, I quite liked a few of them. One told me he modeled his courtship rituals on the animal kingdom. I'm just another paradise bird flaunting my stuff, he said triumphantly, as though this explained everything that needed to be explained. That's a good line. He made me laugh, but I couldn't change their minds. The experience deflated me, not just as a person and as a woman, but as someone who has always been optimistic about our ability to talk each other into better beliefs. We finished recording in November 2016, right after the U.S. general election, which set up a grim backdrop for a newly found pessimism toward rational debate and persuasion. But when the piece aired, a strange thing happened. I was inundated with interview requests. Could I write a 10-step guide to changing minds? Would I accept an award for the successful use of rational persuasion in public? What advice did I have for talking people out of being workplace harassers? I was astonished. Large numbers of people had apparently listened to my conversations with catcallers on the radio, conversations that I had walked away from feeling dejected and defeated, and heard instead instances of persuasive success. I think the explanation is that these conversations bore a sort of Madame Tussauds-like resemblance to what we think good mind changes look like. I said one thing, my cat caller said the opposite thing, and each of us tried to explain why we were right. I had stayed calm, they had been prepared to hear me out. I had used statistics. It looked for all the world like a rational debate, and the fact that I had failed to change any minds with this approach disappeared under the shadow of the unquestioned assumption that I deserved congratulations for even trying. I started to smell a rat. The book Stop Being Reasonable by Eleanor Gordon Smith.
Water Watch. Could another zoonotic pandemic be coming? Thomas Lindsay with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights is here on the rights of nature and how they may have kept Pennsylvania from industry harm. And Friends of the Earth, Lucas Ross is dropping by on the big oil bailout and how fracking could be next. Plus, Arthur West with the Washington League for Increased Transparency and Ethics is suing Fox So-Called News for endangering Americans by calling the coronavirus a hoax. Can he win? The Science Revolution is available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Boy, there is so much going on. I've got some incredible Fox News lawsuit news coming up. We'll get into that in the next hour. Fox News, oh man. And the governor of Massachusetts, during a press conference, I believe it was this morning, choked up. Now, again, Charlie Baker is a Republican, but he is doing contact tracing in Massachusetts. Massachusetts seems to like to elect liberal Republicans. There's still a few of them left, I guess. And but he was choking up when he was describing his best friend's mother's death from coronavirus. I mean, that's just remarkable. So anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls. Dawn in Minneapolis. Hey, Dawn, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hey, Dawn. I'm great. What's up?
Well, I wanted to call to give a little insight from the PPP, the Payment Protection Program, that has just been launched this week. We got approved.
Well, it ran out of money today, by the way.
Well, we've been in queue for weeks. We have a really great local banker, Northeast Bank in Minneapolis, an amazing community bank. They've been helping us. I know they have our interest at our heart. You know, we trust our banker. But the deal that we got handed down is so disgraceful that we're not going to accept any of the money. So they can have $100,000 of their money back because it's between a rock and a hard place for us. So I'm not sure if your listeners know.
Tell me the story.
Well, of this loan, 25% of it has to be used for utilities or rent, okay? And 75% of it has to go to your payroll costs. So we understand that it's all about getting people off unemployment and keeping everybody working and all of that. And that's all well and good. However, the problems are twofold. One is it's so strictly regulated, the funds that you can pay out of this money, that we can't pay just normal operating costs. We can't pay our vendors. We can't pay for food. We can't pay any other loan balances or payments out of that. Otherwise, we'll be charged with fraud, okay? It can only go to utilities. Wow. It can only go to rent. Fine. 75% goes to your employees. Well, the caveat of this is on June 30th, we have to bring back our average monthly payroll in full on June 30th, or we have to pay all the money back within 2 years. So for us, our average monthly payroll is $40,000 a month. I have zero work, Tom. I'm a catering company. So what would you do? Would you go $100,000 in debt and then have to come back and pay $40,000 of payroll? All of our workers full, like it's just a normal month. June is a huge wedding month. It's a big month for us. So we're walking away.
Yeah.
And we're going to cut our losses.
Yeah, I get it.
We're going to try to keep the lights on without any employees. And that's the PPP
that is so tragic.
In real life.
I mean, I got it. We have a small business that does this show, with a half a dozen more or less employees, and we had to lay off one part-time person, and I've stopped taking any pay. and the guy in New York who kind of runs the business end of our business has stopped taking any pay, and we may do that for years. I have no idea, because our advertising revenue has collapsed, and I'm guessing that the fundraising drive from Free Speech TV, which kicks a little bit of money towards us, is going to collapse too. But we'll make it through. I can live for without an income. I'm on Social Security, but the way that the countries in Europe are doing this is they're saying, here's a gift, a grant it depends on the country. It's 90% of your pay, I believe, in Denmark, 85% in Germany. I think it's 80 or 85% in France. I think it's Norway is higher than 90%. I don't remember the exact amounts. These are all from memory, but they're in that range. And basically what they're saying to employers is, we realize your employees are not working. They're home, right? They're doing absolutely nothing for you. But it's easier, cheaper, and more convenient for the government to give you the money and you pay your payroll, and that's a gift and it's gone forever. The government will absorb that cost, than it is for those people to be laid off and then apply for unemployment, and then we've got to process that through a completely different unemployment system, and then those people may or may not be able to come back to work, and blah, 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 blah. So these countries are not experiencing massive unemployment because their people are still employed and they're still getting their checks. And that becomes super important here in the United States, where a third of Americans get their health insurance from their employer. And if we were using the European system, people like you, Dawn, would be able to not only continue paying your employees, but also continue paying for their benefits, and you would never have to pay back a penny of it. It's nuts that they're doing this as a loan. It's absolutely nuts. And we talked about should we look into this program, and very, very quickly decided no, we're not going to do that for some of the reasons that you're talking about. This is just so wrong. Dawn, thank you for the call and for alerting us to what's going on. Alan in Cedar City, Utah. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. After what you just talked about, it's so upsetting, the stimulus and relief programs. It's hard to talk about what I called for, but we need like three more of what we just passed, only better. But anyway, what I called for is just to give you an update here in Utah. Things don't seem to be too bad from my perspective. Most people are being respectful about social distancing in the grocery stores. There's some high school kids out playing soccer games, and some people that seem to have a kind of a cruddy attitude that won't keep their distance. And the governor, I think, is not a liberal Republican, but he seems to be handling things responsibly, trying not to be really restrictive in rural areas where it might not be as important as it is in urban areas like Salt Lake or up by Park City, where they had a lot of resort traffic earlier in the year. But right now,
do you think, Alan, that because do you think that I'd like you to tell me about the legislature in just a second, but do you think that because Utah has, I believe it's a significant majority population of Mormons, if not a huge consequential minority population, and basically the Mormon Church kind of controls the government or has a huge influence on the government in Utah? Do you think the Mormon Church has famously, through the decades, you can think that Joseph Smith and his whole thing about the angels and the plates and all that stuff is just total, bat guano crazy. But they have always, the Mormon Church has always emphasized family and community. And that set of values, that's really a relatively progressive set of values, that set of values is what is animating or informing the government actions in Utah that might not be the kind of cruel, raw capitalism that you're seeing in other states, or we don't care about the people in other states?
Oh, Tom, I think you're absolutely right. There's the community thing. On one of your previous shows, one of the callers said that the assistance that the church gives unemployed people and stuff comes with a lot of strings attached, and actually it varies from congregation to congregation, but it's somewhat better than what he described from what I've seen. But yes, that's part of it, and there's a lot of doctors. I mean, the president of the church right now was a eminent surgeon, and so they're consulting the experts and trying to base decisions that the church makes in recommending what the members do. They're trying to base it on real medical expertise, and the church does have more influence on
so you were going to tell me about the legislature.
Like the church has a lot of influence, although they like to downplay that. But yeah, I think what you're saying is just right. That's calming things down here to some extent.
So you were in the process, when I interrupted you, my apologies, you were in the process of describing something that the state legislature there in Utah is about to do, Alan, and we have a little less than a minute before we're going to hit a hard break here.
Yeah, well, as far as I can see, they're just trying to clarify the legal basis for enforcing they haven't been like citing and fining people much at all, and there hasn't been much of a need to, but I think they're just trying. It may even be in response to what the president's saying about, I have total authority over everything, and they're trying to kind of lay down a marker in case there are lawsuits and stuff. I can't tell for sure. But a lot of people are regarding it as a big government power grab, and so, that's kind of messy, the politics of it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds all kind of stuff. But you're not seeing the eruptions like they're seeing in Michigan, where people are out waving Confederate flags and saying, "Don't tread on me."
No, not so far. I'd say nothing like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good news. That's good news. Alan, thank you for the call and thanks for the heads up. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. We're seeing this play out in different parts of the country in different ways, and it's kind of revealing the character of our nation and our regions.
Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In California, Governor Gavin Newsom has said we're going to have a $75 million fund. Another report says $150 million to give $500 to every undocumented immigrant in the state. Thank you. And welcome back. Zoe in Louisville, Kentucky. Hey, Zoe, thanks for watching YouTube. What's up?
Hey there, Tom. Well, we did get a little something like that protest that you were describing up in, was it Michigan yesterday? We did. Mm-hmm. There was a group of people that timed their protest to be right at its, most fervent, noisy peak right during the governor's 5 o'clock press conference yesterday. So he has a press conference every day at 5 o'clock. And fortunately, and this is I don't get to do this very often, but I get to brag about my elected official from Kentucky, and that is our governor, Andy Beshear, because he's doing a bang-up job. But they made sure that they were noisy enough and timed well enough to completely interrupt the press conference. And he was literally sitting there talking about how many people were sick, how many people were in ICU, and how many people had died. And I'm pretty sure that I heard a shofar at one point. So, it was, they just, they were doing anything they could to sort of interrupt everything. But there were only like 60, 75 people. Right. Of course, they all had masks on, but they were all nice and close together. There were signs that said things like King Bashir. Of course, they had the "Don't Tread on Me" flags. I don't know if I ever saw a Confederate flag, but quite positive that some of those ding-dongs had one of those out there. But I did not see those. Of course, they were going on about herd immunity. And, this is just another one of these gaslight projects that's out there to try and drown out the people that are being nonpartisan and clear-headed and using the science to determine what it is they need to decide to do that's in the best interest of their people. And, I'm actually, go ahead.
No, I would say it goes beyond that, Joe. I think that what we're looking at is right-wing ideologues who believe that the government actually should not have any role in the life of the nation outside of running the army, these so-called libertarians, and now they've basically taken over the Republican Party. It's being funded and fueled by billionaires who don't want to pay federal income taxes. They're using this as essentially a recruiting tool, just like they used Obamacare. How dare a black president tell us, white people out here in Michigan and Kansas and Kentucky that we have to have health insurance? How dare he? And they took it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, you don't have to pay the fine if you don't have it. I mean, this is just recruiting, I think, by right-wing crazies.
Sure, and I mean the right-wing crazies that were in charge of this. One of them was a representative in the House. Her name's Savannah Maddox. She introduced a bill a while back that got voted down, but it was going to allow any business owner, to sue the governor directly for closing their business as a result of whatever the governor determines. In this case, it's a pandemic. But the woman who was sort of I guess you could call her the AstroTurf. She was the front. Her name's Erica Callahan, and she is a friend of our former total dingbat governor, Matt Bevin. And she owns a furniture company in Lexington, which has been shut down. So this was her big temper tantrum.
Which she wants to
reopen. Her big public temper tantrum.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and Trump wants to reopen his hotels and his golf courses and all this kind of stuff. I get it. Zoe, thank you for the call. That's fascinating. Thanks for the report from Kentucky. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. We've got a new video up for... Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 19... Just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. Video. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Elizabeth in Pacifica, California. Hey, Elizabeth, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? First, I just let you know what social distancing looks like out here. People are doing a good job. There are some people who watch Fox News who are not getting the message, but overwhelmingly we're being respectful, covering our mouths, and so that's working great here. But I'm a new viewer to your show. I enjoy it very much, and I know that you've probably been talking about the new normal. I mean, we keep hearing on conventional media how when things get back to normal. I believe that this time is a time for change, maybe to a new and better normal of justice and equality and solidarity. What are your thoughts?
I think that's happening, Elizabeth. I think it's happening right in front of us. When Joe Biden goes from saying, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all, to saying everybody, 60 years old should be able to sign. He's inching in the Bernie Sanders direction. We got to do something about student debt. When he was one of the people who signed on for the 2005 bankruptcy bill. When you see Democrats shifting at the highest levels, abandoning essentially neoliberalism and embracing a more progressive vision for America. I mean, he's not completely there yet, but a lot's going to depend on who he picks as VP. Elizabeth Warren yesterday said she would take the job if it was offered to her. That's a huge, that would be a game changer. I don't know, you can kind of knock wood and pray for it or hold on for it, but I think that the myth, the neoliberal myth, Ronald Reagan, government is not the solution to your problems. Government is the problem or is the cause of your problems. Bill Clinton, it's time to end welfare as we know it. The era of big government is over. This whole neoliberal consensus that has held America since 1981. We are in the 40th year of an experiment with trickle-down economics, aka Reaganism, aka Clintonism, aka neoliberalism. We're in the 40th year of that experiment, and this virus is proving what a fraud that experiment is, as any national crisis would do. A war at the level of World War II again would prove it as well, or as World War I and World War II did, which led right to the World War I led right to Franklin Roosevelt and et cetera. So I think the change has happened, Elizabeth. And I don't think there's going to be any going back for generations. I think that Arnold Toynbee famously said, or is said to have said, when the last man who remembers the horrors of the last great war dies, the next great war becomes inevitable. And that's basically about 80 years, a human lifespan. And if you look back 80 years from now, was basically the end of the Great Depression and that horrible cycle. And we came out of that a far more progressive country with the New Deal and all this stuff. And then 80 years before that was the Civil War, and we came out of that far more progressive. And 80 years before that was the American Revolution, and we came out of that far more progressive than when we were a British colony. And these 80-year cycles, you can literally take them back to the War of the Roses. And I think that, a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, America is going to be, assuming that Trump doesn't succeed in taking down our government and canceling elections and stuff like that, or stealing elections, I think that America is going to be a much more progressive country. What do you think?
I think that the window is there. This, for me as a baby boomer and coming to this period, I'm in seeing the down cycle happening, with Trump, who could possibly declare himself as king any day now. But I'm very, very encouraged by what I'm seeing elsewhere, that people are coming together. They're being forced to, except for the very rich, to work things out, and I hope and pray that this will continue for that next 80 years and get us and help prevent other pandemics that are coming down the line that will respond better, will be better organized, and that solidarity, that empathy across class and race will prevail. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think the other question that, the Democrats are proposing $30 billion to test everybody in the country. We spend 900 or 800 and change billion dollars a year on our military to, quote, protect us. I think that we need to reconsider what we need by way of protection. Do we need 170 military bases around the world? Do we need 700 military bases in 170 countries around the world? I don't think so. But I think we do need a good public health service. I think we do need Medicare for all, everybody in the United States having access to health care. I think we do need an educated workforce, and we need people to be able to become doctors and nurses for free. Those are things that we do need. And if we just took, half the Pentagon budget, we could completely transform this country. And so, Elizabeth, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate you being a new viewer to Free Speech TV and to our program. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Measuring What Counts, the Global Movement for Well-Being by Joe Stiglitz, Jamail Fatoussi, and Martine Dahr. And this is from the first chapter labeled Overview. The high-level expert group on the measurement of economic performance and social progress, also known as HLEG, builds on the analyses and recommendations of the 2009 Commission on the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress, also known as the Stiglitz-Sen-Fatoussi Commission, in highlighting the role of well-being metrics in policy and encouraging a more active dialogue among economic theory and statistical practice. The report makes explicit the often implicit assumptions hidden in statistical practices and their real-world consequences. Its central message is that what we measure affects what we do. If we measure the wrong thing, we will do the wrong thing. If we don't measure something, it becomes neglected, as if the problem didn't exist. There is no simple way of representing every aspect of well-being in a single number in the way GDP describes market economic output. This has led to GDP being used as a proxy for both economic welfare, like people's command over commodities, and general welfare, which also depends on people's attributes and non-market activities. GDP was not designed for this task. We need to move beyond GDP when assessing a country's health and complement GDP with a broader dashboard of indicators that would reflect the distribution of well-being in society and its sustainability across the social, economic, and environmental dimensions. Excuse me. The challenge is to make the dashboard small enough to be easily comprehensible, but large enough to summarize what we care about the most. The 2008 crisis and its aftermath illustrate why a change in perspective is needed. The GDP loss that followed the crisis was not the temporary one-off event predicted by conventional macroeconomic models. Its effects have lasted over time, suggesting that the crisis caused the permanent loss of significant amounts of capital, not just machines and structures, but also hidden capital in the form of lower on-the-job training, permanent scars on young people entering the labor market during a recession, and lower trust in an economic system rigged to benefit a few. Different metrics, including better measurements of people's economic insecurity, could have shown that the consequences of the recession were much deeper than the GDP statistics indicated, and governments might have responded more strongly to mitigate the negative impacts of the crisis. If, on the basis of GDP, the economy is perceived to be well on the road to recovery, as many governments believed in 2010, one would not take the strong policy measures needed to support people's living conditions suggested by metrics that inform on whether most of the population still feels in recession. Nor would one take measures to bolster the safety net and social protection in the absence of metrics on the extent of people's economic insecurity. These failings in the policy responses to the crisis were compounded by overly focusing on the consequences of public spending in raising government's liabilities, when this spending could take the form of investment, increasing the assets in governments and countries' balance sheets. The same follows when measures of unemployment do not reflect the full extent of a country's unused labor resources. The beyond GDP agenda is sometimes characterized as anti-growth, but this is not the case. The use of a dashboard of indicators reflecting what we value as a society would have led, most likely, to stronger GDP growth than that actually achieved by most countries after 2008. This book also looks at progress in implementing the recommendations of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fatoussi Commission since 2009, identifying areas that require increased focus by statistical agencies, researchers, and policymakers. The UN Sustainable Development Goals agreed by the international community in 2015 clearly go far beyond GDP, but their 169 policy targets and more than 200 indicators for global monitoring are too many to guide policies. Countries will have to identify their priorities within the broader UN agenda and upgrade their statistical capacities, which, even in developed countries, are insufficient to monitor whether the agreed-upon commitments are being met. The international community should invest in upgrading the statistical capacity of developing countries, especially in areas where country data are needed to assess global phenomena, such as climate change or the world distribution of income. Inequality in income and wealth has today a central role in policy discussions in ways it did not in 2009. But important progress is still needed in a range of areas, such as measuring what happens at both ends of the income distribution, integrating different data sources, and measuring the joint distribution of income, consumption, and wealth at the individual level. When looking at inequality, it's also important to look at differences between groups. These are called horizontal inequalities, at inequalities within households, and the way resources are shared and managed, which are especially important in the case of wealth. We should also look beyond inequality in outcomes to inequality of opportunity. Inequality of opportunity is even more unacceptable than inequality of outcomes. But the operational distinction between the two is fuzzy, as we don't observe all circumstances that shape people's outcomes and are independent of their efforts. The book Measuring What Counts by Joe Stiglitz and friends. Thank you. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you.
Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And $1,200. We're all, by the way, Professor Wolff will be with us at the bottom of the hour. We're all supposed to be receiving $1,200 in our checking accounts. Mine hasn't arrived. I don't know if yours has. But the Washington Post is reporting many Americans woke up today expecting to find payment of $1,200, but it wasn't there, or it was the wrong amount. And parents of children complained they didn't get their $500. And here's where it gets real interesting. Several million people who filed their taxes via HR Block, TurboTax, and other popular services were unable to get their payments because the IRS didn't have the direct deposit information on file. That's because these companies insert themselves in the middle between you and the IRS so that they can give you advances on your taxes. And then when your tax refund comes, it goes right to those companies. Now, in other countries, I don't know if you saw Michael Moore's movie, Where to Invade Next, but it's fascinating. And in that movie, he talks about how other countries do taxes. And he describes a couple of countries where they basically calculate your taxes for you, send you a postcard or a letter that says, okay, here's how much how much was collected, here's how much you owe, here's a check for the overpayment, or here's how much you owe us. In other words, there's no IRS or H&R Block. All right, the government does it and says, if you disagree, feel free to let us know why. But here, we did your taxes for you. And it's very simple, it's very straightforward, and there's several governments that Michael Moore laid out, and these are all European governments, particularly Northern European governments, but there's several governments where not only do they do your taxes for you, but they say, okay, your taxes this year were $3,422, and of that, $938 of that went to fund the military, $722 of it went to fund schools, $312 of it went to fund the functions of government, whatever it may be, right? In other words, you literally see where your money went. We could easily do this in the United States. And we have been able to easily do this in the United States since the 60s or the 70s, since the era of widespread computerization in government offices. Why haven't we? Because H&R Block and TurboTax and Quicken and all these companies, they're making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in profits off doing your taxes something that should be completely unnecessary. And because we've got this cumbersome profit-based system in the world of taxes, just like we do in healthcare, United Healthcare just announced that hey, first quarter profits $5 billion, or revenues, $5 billion. We're doing fine, United Healthcare says. Well, of course. They've got us all by the short hairs. I mean, this is the profit opportunity in healthcare, the profit opportunity in taxes literally don't even exist in many countries around the world, because the government does your taxes for you and simply says, here's what you owe, and here's how we calculated it. You can double check our math. And the government says, oh, you had a hospital bill? We'll pay it. No out-of-pocket, no pharmaceuticals, no co-pays. That's the norm all around the world, including in Canada. I don't know about how they do taxes in Canada, but that's how they do healthcare. And I find it just amazing. I mean, what this coronavirus is revealing are these cracks, these fractures. Another one is Fox News. I mentioned this before the break, or before the hour, in the last hour, that I was going to get into this in this hour. You'll recall the Fox RGBH lawsuit. You can Google Fox RGBH lawsuit. It's recombinant bovine growth hormone is what RGBH stands for. And this was a case back 15 years ago or thereabouts, when two reporters for a Fox station down in Florida, there's a Fox-owned television station, Steve, and I'm not remembering their last name or his wife's name, but anyhow, the two of them, this is a married couple, that were both reporters for the station. And they were given the assignment of reporting on the question of whether this was when they were first starting to shoot up cows with these hormones in a big way, and it was real controversial because Japan and some European countries were refusing to accept meat from the United States because we used this GMO, this lab manufactured hormone, this recombinant bovine growth hormone, that they were concerned might cause cancer or stimulate the growth of cancers and things like that as it made its way into the human food supply. And so these two reporters went out and did some really good, serious investigative reporting. And what they found was that, this RGBH might be a problem. And so they put together the report. And Monsanto got wind that this was happening, and they leaned on Fox, or on this Fox station, and said, no, don't let them report that. And this husband and wife reporting team had to change their story something like 20 or 30 times. And over and over and over again. Actually, I'm trying to Google this thing while I'm talking. RGBH lawsuit. There we go. And it's foxgbhsuit.com. And Jane, that's right, Jane Aker and Steve, don't remember his last name. But anyhow, the website is right there, foxgbhsuit.com. So Fox ultimately fired these two people because they would not rewrite their story to say, everything's good, Monsanto's wonderful, just be happy. They fired them. So they sued for wrongful termination. And in a state court, before a jury of their peers, the jury unanimously awarded them a couple $100,000 in wrongful termination. And Fox appealed this. And the appeals court said, ruled against Steve and Jane, and the appeals court said, no, this is considered free speech. Fox can require its reporters to lie to people. That's legal. So that was 15 years ago, and that decision stands. Well, now there's a group in Washington State called the Washington League for Increased Transparency and Ethics, WashLight, and we had a representative of this group on our program last week. When they first filed this lawsuit against Fox News is a different division of Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch's empire, but they filed this lawsuit against Fox News saying that they were intentionally accusing the network of, quote, deceptive coronavirus coverage and, all that kind of stuff. Well, the network's lawyers have filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit. And in this motion, they say, and I quote, this is from the Fox lawyers, quote, "The First Amendment does not permit censoring this type of speech," in other words, saying there's nothing to worry about the coronavirus. "The First Amendment does not permit censoring this type of speech based on the theory that it is false or outrageous, nor does the law of the state of Washington." The lawsuit says that Fox News and Sean Hannity and Trish Reagan, quote, "acted in bad faith to willfully and maliciously disseminate false information, denying and minimizing the danger posed by the spread of the novel coronavirus." That's from the lawsuit. And Fox's response? We can lie if we want. That's called free speech. And by the way, they're probably right. I think that probably it's not going to be Wash Light that's going to end up having standing in this case. It's probably going to be the families of people who watched Fox News aggressively, who can find some evidence that this family member watched Fox News, like they bought products from the advertisers or something like that, bought, Sean Hannity bobbleheads. And then those members died, and the families can sue for wrongful death. But we'll see.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Very, very interesting out there. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. And not the reason for my calling, but given your last rant there, I'm personally in the middle of that. I'm in year 12 of a litigation against a giant corporation, and won a unanimous jury verdict back in May, and we're now under appeal again, 12 years in. So this Fox story, Big and Rich is always gonna litigate forever. But my reason for calling is this Michigan protesters and the other pockets of them around the nation. If I'm to understand them correctly, this is a grievance over liberty, and the countervailing force is public safety. That's basically the gist of it, right?
Yeah, it is. Eamon Bundy, for example, I reported on this about 2 weeks ago, or maybe even 3 weeks ago. He's got this little compound in Idaho, and or maybe on the Oregon border, maybe it's here in Oregon, where he was saying, the First Amendment protects your right to assemble, and it does. The government shall not prevent people.
Yeah, in a public health outbreak, such as a pandemic, there are other considerations. Anyway, my point is this. These people, we recognize them with their Confederate flags and so forth. But correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't this the same subcultural group of Americans who 20 years ago were screaming at us liberals when we were raising questions about civil liberties and privacy over porno scanners and body searches and facial recognition and all this stuff that came in that the Islamophobes loved the violations of liberty there to weed out dangerous terrorists. This is now the same people. If you had a Venn diagram of, those two subsets of people, what you have is the ultimate black and white case of hypocrisy here, where they're occupying both sides of the fence on a individual liberty versus public safety issue. And I don't think you have to be yourself an epidemiologist to be able to say that this fear and the consequence and the number of people affected is far, far greater now than was the one we were all afraid of 20 years ago after September 11th. So look around
we
your
only had
community.
3,000 people die on 9/11.
Right, and the number's going to keep tallying. But look around your community, your neighbors, friends, family, coworkers. When we're all back to work, recognize these people as the same people, susceptible to a fear-driven, irrational snap behavior. And there'll be numbers in a few weeks, a few months. These folks who were out in the streets doing this, they're going to be among the infected and dying, will they not?
Yes, and sadly, I mean, I don't wish death on anybody, but you're absolutely right, Eric. And go ahead.
Will the people close to them look at that and say, "Oh, you know what? Maybe we really were taking this notion too far"? I mean, will they finally absorb the science, Tom? Will they?
I think that's going to happen as this virus starts pushing its way into these more rural areas in these red states. I think that's going to happen. There's going to be a come to Jesus moment. It's just the problem that they have in Michigan is that Gretchen Whitmer's lockdown order is actually stopping the spread of the virus, which is allowing this denialism to proliferate. Eric, thanks for the call.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. I'm not seeing him on the. Oh, he's on Skype. Professor Richard Wolff is with us, Professor, welcome back. Last week we were talking about what's normal going to look like when we finally get around to, opening our country back up. I think Germany is giving us some clues. They've got both serological testing, have you ever had it, and actual virus testing, do you have it now? And they're doing contact tracing, and now they're slowly starting to open up areas where they think they've got it under control. But what do you think that the economy will look like after this? What will our new normal be? Okay. Apparently Professor Wolff cannot hear me. So we're going to try and pick him up at the bottom of the hour. We've got some technical stuff to work out here. So that said, there's a few other things that I wanted to rant with you and at you about. And we'll pick up Dr. Wolff in 10 minutes. Donald Trump. Oh, this is so funny. This is from Andy Borowitz. He publishes it over the New Yorker years ago. He gave us permission to use his stuff anytime we want. I don't know if that still applies, but I'll just share a little bit of it. Borowitz, of course, is a satirist, so this is satire. But let me just share it with you. Donald J. Trump vehemently defended his decision to have his name printed on millions of IRS checks being issued to the American people, telling reporters on Wednesday, "I want my name synonymous with the coronavirus." Lashing out at critics of his decision, Trump said, "I've been working on this pandemic day in, day out. I deserve total credit for it." He said that by putting his name on the checks, whenever the American people hear about the coronavirus, the first thing they'll think about is me. Fauci says, "I don't think it's really necessary because people already associate the coronavirus with him." And Barack Obama says he was surprised by Trump's statement, remarking, "I had no idea that he knew what the word synonymous meant." Okay. Angela Merkel, I mentioned in the first hour that she's slowly reopening Germany. There's some, Katrin Benhold writing about this in the New York Times today. A month ago, when the number of deaths stood at 90 Germany-wide, Merkel's government imposed strict social distancing rules that banned groups of more than 2 people and shut down the economy. By Wednesday, German infections stand at 136,000. They've got 3,400 deaths, which is extremely low compared to Spain and Italy that are both, in the neighborhood of 20,000. They only have 3,000 deaths. Their hospitals are not overwhelmed. Their ICUs are still available. Germany's strategy of early and widespread testing and its large number of ICU beds helps explain the country's relatively low mortality rate. But they trust in Merkel's leadership is the reason why people are complying. And people trust her because she's just laying it out. She's telling them the truth. As in the previous stages of the pandemic, writes Katrin Benhold for the New York Times, Ms. Merkel consulted widely before she made her announcement Wednesday. She studied the recommendations from a panel of 26 top academics in a range of fields, including behavioral psychology and ethics, and then hammered out an agreement with the governors of Germany's 16 states. She's working collaboratively. And I can tell you, some of those people are her political enemies, but they are working together for what's best for Germany. Meanwhile, Representative Katie Porter, who is just like one of our best members of Congress, she is seriously PO'd. The private equity firms, these vulture capitalists, are saying, and they, one of the big things that we talked about a week or so ago was this hospital firing this doctor who spoke out. Well, it turns out the doctor didn't actually work for the hospital. He worked for one of these private equity, one of these companies owned by private equity, she is writing a letter to the companies that own the companies. These are hedge funds. There are these private equity firms like KKR. She's saying, why are you guys asking for money, and why are you hiring, why are you, controlling the nation's emergency room doctors, and why are you cutting their pay? This piece in Daily Kos by Hunter, the president of the American College of Emergency Physicians is William Jacquis, and he's also the senior vice president of Envision Healthcare. This is why you get these surprise billing things, because these ER docs are not part of any networks. They're owned by private equity. So you show up in the hospital, you're going to get billed no matter what your insurance pays for. And they are saying that they need $3.6 billion. The 2 guys who own this private equity company are worth $11 billion. $11 billion. Steve Schwartzman and Henry Kravitz. And they're going to the government saying, we need $3 billion to bail us out because we've got these doctors and all. As Hunter says, the alternative is for capitalism to suffer the consequences of capitalism. These 2 guys can bail out their own company, and they could still buy as many yachts as they want. Or we could take Envision, this company that employs tens of thousands of ER doctors across the country and other physicians. We could just nationalize the company. Katie Porter is demanding answers. She's like, what the hell is going on here? She wrote this long letter to these people. You can find it over on her Twitter feed, Rep. Katie Porter. We'll be back with Professor Wolff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Internet gods willing and all that sort of thing. We'll be back with Professor Wolff in just a moment.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato. And this is from the introduction titled Thinking Big Again. Across the globe, countries, including in the developing world, look to emulate the success of the U.S. economy. In doing so, they look at the power of, quote, market-driven, end quote, mechanisms versus what might seem like old-style state-driven mechanisms in places like Europe or the ex-Soviet Union. But the United States is not what it seems. The preacher of the small state free market doctrine has for decades been directing large public investment programs in technology and innovation that underlie its past and current economic success. From the internet to biotech and even shale gas, the U.S. state has been the key driver of innovation-led growth, willing to invest in the most uncertain phase in the innovation cycle and let business hop on for the easier ride down the way. If the rest of the world wants to emulate the U.S. model, they should do as the United States actually did, not as it says it did. More state, not less. A key part of this lesson should be to learn how to organize, direct, and evaluate state investments so that they can be strategic, flexible, and mission-oriented. Only in this way will top minds find it an honor to work for the state. This is something that needs to be understood not only by the rest of the world, but in the United States itself, where the dominant political narrative is endangering funding for future innovation and economic growth. In 2013, U.S. government spending for basic research fell below what it was a decade earlier, and most likely will continue to fall due to congressional gridlock over the public budget. Rather than static discussions about the size of the deficit, there must be more debate about its actual composition. How to invest strategically in key areas such as research and development, R&D, education, and human capital formation that will increase gross domestic product, the GDP, in the future, bringing the debt-GDP ratio down as a consequence. And how to engage in a debate about the direction of change so that such investments will lead to growth that is not only smarter, that is innovation-led, but also more inclusive and sustainable. These issues are urgent with the upcoming 2016 U.S. presidential election, which could, if properly informed, change the parameters of the current static debate. The United States desperately needs politicians with the courage to swim against the tide of popular rhetoric and outline a bolder vision for the state's dynamic role in fostering the economic growth of the future. In emerging economies such as China, the public sector is indeed investing billions in green technologies with the expectation that these industries will be the engines of future growth. The United States could take inspiration from its own history. In 1961, an American president set out a bold, ambitious, and risky mission to send a man to the moon. Who will have the courage to set out a new vision for America today? Addressing today's societal challenges, for example, those around climate change, requires a vision, a mission, and most of all, confidence about the state's role in the economy. As eloquently argued by Keynes in The End of Laissez-Faire, 1926, the important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. End of quote. This, however, requires the public sector to have vision and confidence, increasingly missing today. Why? What is the role of the public sector in economic growth? After the financial crisis, with public budgets bloated, mainly due to their role in saving the private sector, across the globe we are hearing that in order for nations to be competitive, innovative, and dynamic, we must have more market and less state. As at best we are told, governments merely facilitate the economic dynamism of the private sector. At worst, their lumbering, heavy-handed, and bureaucratic institutions actively inhibit it. The fast-moving, risk-loving, and pioneering private sector, by contrast, is what really drives the type of innovation that creates economic growth. According to this view, the secret behind an engine of innovation like Silicon Valley lies in its entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. The state can intervene in the economy, but only to fix market failures or to level the playing field. It can regulate the private sector in order to account for the external costs companies may impose on the public, like pollution, and it can invest in public goods, such as basic scientific research or the development of drugs with little market potential. To some on the political right, even fixing market failures would be a sin, because such attempts would lead to worse outcomes in the form of government failures. What all these views have in common is the assumption that the state should stick to fixing markets, not directly try to create and shape them. A 2012 Economist article on the future of manufacturing encapsulates this common misperception. This book is committed to dismantling this false image, which underpins a global trend promoted by conservative economists, politicians, and the media of bashing and diminishing the importance of the state. It focuses on what Tony Judt called a discursive battle. How we talk about the state matters. Depicting private business as the innovative force while the state is cast as the inertial one necessary for the basics but too large and heavy to be the dynamic engine, is a description that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to depict the state, continues. So the book is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato. On from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan.
Coming up on this week's Science Revolution is Zach Corrigan with Food and Water Watch. Could another zoonotic pandemic be coming? Thomas Lindsay with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights is here on the rights of nature and how they may have kept Pennsylvania from industry harm. And Friends of the Earth, Lucas Ross is dropping by on the big oil bailout and how fracking could be next. Plus, Arthur West with the Washington League for Increased Transparency and Ethics is suing Fox So-Called News for endangering Americans by calling the coronavirus a hoax. Can he win? The Science Revolution is available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. So it turns out back in November, the spy agencies in the United States were notifying the Trump administration that something's going on in China. Looks like another SARS outbreak. Maybe we should get ready for this. It was ignored. I've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program that basically goes through the whole timeline, all the way from, actually going back to 2018 when Trump disbanded 3 different anti-pandemic agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, and the executive branch. Just closed them down, fired the people. That was the end of that. How he ignored the intelligence in November, he ignored the intelligence in December, he ignored the epidemic now coming into the United States in January, he ignored it in February, just going the blow-by-blow timeline. And I think it's really worth having it all in one place, a good recap, a good summary of this that you can refer to and you can share with your friends. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We were unable to work out our technical problems with Professor Wolff in his home in New York, so we're going to bounce that to another day. He's got other things he has to do today. So, I'll just continue like our normal show here, picking up your phone calls. David, in Claremont, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
About a week and a half ago, I tested positive for the coronavirus. Luckily, it's starting to get better. I'm still waiting for my stimulus, so I thought maybe calling my congressman would help. It was Daniel Webster. The gentleman at the congressman's office told me, well, maybe I should go to a bank and apply for a loan. I told them I have coronavirus. Why would I want to go get other people sick? Are they really that far from reality?
Yes, they are. Yeah, they are. David, tell us about your experience with coronavirus.
I wouldn't wish this on anything. It's like your lungs on fire. You can't catch your breath ever. I had asthma when I was little, and it feels like the world's worst asthma attack.
And you're on the backside of it now? You're recovering?
I'm a lot better than I was, yeah. Got furloughed from my job in the meantime as well, so the stimulus is important to me, just paying bills.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go to a bank and get people sick.
Yeah, I get it, and good on you. This is a very scary disease, and it's got a lot of people experiencing a lot of pain. 2 of the people who work with us, they're down in Texas, and they work on this show. They believe they have coronavirus. They've not been able to get a test, but unable to move, out of breath, can hardly breathe, painful lungs, all fevers, all those symptoms, and a cough and all that kind of stuff. I'm so sorry to hear that it got you, David, but I'm glad to hear that you're feeling better. Thank you for the call. The pain and suffering that is sweeping across this country. In the last hour, a woman called. She's got a catering business, and it's dead. I mean, there's going to be a lot of small businesses, maybe even the majority of small businesses in America, that are going to get wiped out by this. And if we don't come up with some way to put these companies back together, what's going to happen is 2 things. The number one, you're going to have waves of bankruptcies and horrible human tragedy. And the small businesses that are able to hang on or that are left are going to be super vulnerable to a big business coming in, like a big restaurant chain, for example, coming into a town and, there's 40, 50 restaurants that are just teetering on the edge. And, these are businesses that just, 6 months ago would have sold for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars if the restaurant owner was going to sell their business. And now they're on the edge of bankruptcy or they're even underwater. And so now, some big restaurant chain comes in and says, oh, well, we'll buy your business for $10,000. We'll buy your business. We'll just assume your debts. Just give it to us. And so I believe that, lacking really aggressive federal and state intervention, we're going to see another wave of consolidations happening this fall and happening next spring as we start to slowly come out of this thing. That's assuming that a virus or a cure has been developed. But that's what I'm seeing. Anyhow, Jordan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jordan, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm wondering if one of the unintended consequences that may arise is that employers might start discriminating against employees who have not yet contracted the virus and say you are ineligible to work.
Yes, I fully expect that. Or a new category of employee is going to be created, and you're going to see help wanted ads that say, and I'm not sure if this is legal or not. If it is legal, they'll just say it. If it's not legal, they'll figure out a way to do it in code. But basically, help wanted ads that say, wanted cooks, restaurant workers, servers, etc., who have already had coronavirus. And lacking a vaccine, there's actually a certain kind of logic to that. And then, some of them, Papa John's Pizza right now is advertising on television that from the time the pizza comes out of the oven till it's delivered to your door, it's never touched by human hands. And they have contact-free delivery. And I'm expecting to see more. That's the first company I've seen that is advertising like that. I'm expecting to see more and more of that happening, that kind of advertising, and using that we are virus-free or we are as virus-free as you can possibly get is going to start becoming a marketing tool. And this is going to provoke some interesting debates on discrimination and things like that. It's also, this is part of and some of them are fairly explicit about this. This conversation has been had on Fox News on a number of occasions or on right-wing radio as well, that if all these young conservative Republicans go out there and expose themselves like they're doing in Michigan, with these rallies and things, if they can expose themselves, they get sick, they make it through onto the other side. Only about half of people get, bad symptoms, and of the half who get bad symptoms, only a very small percentage of them die if they're under 30. So, it's like going through the portal, but when you come out on the other side, you're now Superman, right? They're going to be well positioned to be a labor force, whereas the people who are over 40, over 50 in particular, who are at much, much higher risk of death, are continuing to shelter in place. They're going to be locked out of the labor pool. We're going to see all kinds of realignments here, Jordan, and I'm not sure it's going to be anything other than ugly. Jordan, thanks a lot for the call. Anna in Minneapolis. Hey, Anna, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Well, I just wanted to let you know that apparently Minnesota needs to be liberated. They're planning a rally. They're planning a rally at the government. I think it's the governor's mansion or the Capitol to fight the shelter-in-place orders.
Yeah, we're seeing the new Tea Party forming here.
Well, and I don't feel like Minnesota has really been that bad. The home stores are still open, groceries, liquor stores. They can still go on the lake now that spring is here. It's not like it's been a complete shutout. So I don't know. But it's very frustrating, especially for those of us who are taking this seriously. And I have a daughter who has underlying health conditions. And I just seen Dr. Oz running his big trap, saying that only 2 to 3% of the kids will die, so we should open the schools back up.
Right. And,
yeah, I know.
He would be singing a different tune if it was his daughter.
Exactly.
These are the same people who were out there 10 years ago saying, we don't need Obamacare. It's an abomination. We don't need to cover all Americans. All Americans don't need health insurance. All Americans don't want health insurance. So what if we've got 37 million uninsured people in the United States? No big deal. I'm not one of them. Therefore, that's kind of their mentality. I'm not and a lot of these young people, a lot of them are younger people, and they're basically saying, I'm not in a high risk group, and so bring it on. And it's kind of a weird form of machismo combined with false bravado, combined with, being pushed by right-wing billionaires who want their businesses to reopen, and they want the business world to get back to normal. This goes back to my rant from last Friday that Donald Trump has been pursuing all along, the herd immunity strategy. And herd immunity means you got to let the virus burn through the country. And I think this is why even in South Dakota, where it's taken down, cities, or a city, that, the Republican governor is still saying, no, I'm not going to do anything. It's all good. They just figure the more people can get sick, the faster it will, it may be a stress on our hospitals, but who cares about hospital workers anyway? And when it's over, everything will be good, and we'll be the last ones standing. And it's bizarre, it's inhumane, it's dangerous. But if you're looking at it purely in terms of dollars and cents and those numbers, and particularly if you can figure out a way to not provide health care to people, just let them die at home, it actually makes a certain amount of bizarre logic, at least to a sociopath. Anna, thank you for the call, and thanks for the heads up. Jeez. I'm telling you, these things are going to pop up all over the country because they get publicity. And that's what these guys want. They want publicity. They want to be in the eye of the storm. They want to be the focus of attention. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Bob in Westminster, Colorado. Hey, Bob, what's up?
How you doing there, Tom?
Good.
We had locally a post on TV last night, and he made a few comments which didn't go national, but he was saying that their tracking shows that 78% of the people are complying, but actually if we could get 90%, we'd peak a lot sooner. And the review for our stand down is like April 26th at this point. And there was one other final thing that came up as far as kickback in Colorado. One of our notable gun rights senators called his thing too Gestapo-like, which he responded to, and he really got emotional about it because he is Jewish.
Is this he that you're talking about, Governor Jared Polis?
Yeah, he's Jewish. I think he's Jewish, and I won't give you the senator's name, but he's a conservative gun rights, gun advocate senator down in Douglas County, I think, Douglas County area of Colorado, which is extremely right-wing. And he basically it's like, I think if he was, Polis is offended because he likened the initiative to stand down like a Nazi movement or something, or made it like it was a Gestapo attack. Excuse me, I'm kind of.
No, I get it. I get it. This is their shtick. It's like, the tyranny is here. We've been warning you about this for decades, that someday big government is going to come and they're going to take your gun and they're going to lock you in your house and they're going to do terrible things. And they're here. Bob, thank you for that. Thanks for the heads up. Alan in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to talk about the economic impact, particularly the Fed. As a layperson, I'm having a hard time understanding why the Fed has to print out $1 trillion a day to give to the banks, the financial system. From my standpoint as a layperson, these banks have loaned money to hedge funds and speculators and people with leveraged options and things like that. Main Street didn't cause this crash, so why are the billionaires getting bailed out by the Fed?
Because they own the politicians. I mean, it's literally just that simple, Alan. I mean, Jimmy Carter on this program in 2015 said America is no longer a democracy; it's an oligarchy, and he's right. I mean, the study that Gillens and Page did that found that the desires of average working people are not translated into legislation. That looked at the period from 1982 or 83 up until 2004, as I recall, or 2003. It was that period of time. And that was the period of time where they said, we are no longer a democracy. America is no longer a democracy. This is a study done by Princeton University and Northwestern University. And so, when you've got an oligarchic government, when you've got a government that has been captured by billionaires, you shouldn't be surprised that the billionaires get whatever the hell they want.
Well, you know what? Let's sick Katie Porter on the Fed.
Yeah, and Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm with you, Alan. Thank you for the call.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah, we've got some really kick-ass tough women out here, and Katie Porter and Elizabeth Warren, and they need to be going after these people. We all need to be going after them. This is part of. I mean, either America is going to reinvent itself in a more egalitarian way, or it's going to reinvent itself as a fascist nation. These protests, in quote, that you're seeing, these are the beginning of the fascism. We'll be back. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980 and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Back when I was a kid and used to go to church, my mom took me to the Methodist church, and then later I was in the Church of God and then the Coptics, and I went through a period of my life where I was very churchy. And one of the things that I constantly heard was this riff, based on both the words of Jesus and Paul, that principalities and powers are at war, that there is a war between good and evil, between the forces of darkness and light, however it's characterized or whatever metaphor is used, both in the Bible and in the sermons, that there's this battle going on. And I've never, to this day, that much skepticism about, frankly. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And it seems to me that we're looking at a similar battle right now in the United States of America that is fighting. There's a fight going on to define what this country is going to be like for the next 4 generations, for the next 80-year cycle. And on the one side, you've got the right-wing billionaires who want what Franklin Roosevelt and Henry Wallace, as vice president, called fascism. The merger of corporate and state interests, the takeover of government, I would call it oligarchy, the takeover of government by the very, very rich. They have that right now. They've largely had it since the 1980s, and they want to continue it. And they want to double down on all the fascistic pieces of it, including, virtually unlimited executive power as long as the executive is a right-wing Republican. And they're looking at an uprising in America against progressive values. And we're seeing the little green shoots, the springtime shoots of that uprising popping up, where the DeVos family is funding this right-wing group in Michigan that's funding or encouraging these right-wing protests in Michigan. Don't tread on me. We had a caller earlier saying it's happening in Kentucky. We had another caller just a few minutes ago in Minnesota saying that it's happening in Minnesota. There's going to be a rally today in front of the governor's mansion or something like that, or maybe it's this weekend. But it's coming. And I've been saying for some time that I think that this virus, this public health crisis, is giving the lie to neoliberalism. It's letting Americans see how insanely corrupt and poisonous, essentially, the neoliberal philosophy that Ronald Reagan brought us in 1981 when he changed both the economic and political systems of this country, away from the New Deal, away from Keynesian economics, away from government of, by, and for the people, to an oligarchic form of government of, by, and for the billionaires. Reagan did that in 81, and we're still living in that era. It's a 40-year experiment. We now have the proof. It doesn't work. And all across the country, you're even seeing Republicans. You know, Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, the governor of Maryland, Governor Hogan. These are Republicans. Are saying, no, we've got to pull together on this. We've got to, we need to do these things together. Versus, the 8 holdout right-wing governors who are saying, no, nothing to see here, don't worry, we're going to pursue herd immunity in our states. And, we're going to come out of this great. But beyond that, they're also promoting basically neo-fascism. And I think this is going to be the next big political battle. And I think that this is going to be the foundational battle of November 2020 and going forward. I think that this is still going to be on the plate for 2022 and 2024 as the billionaires try to bring back their whole Reaganistic thing of, no, government is the enemy of the people. Government is, they've been promoting for some time now the idea that a free press is the enemy of the people. You should only listen to a media that is owned by billionaire oligarchs like Rupert Murdoch. You should only read the Wall Street Journal and New York Post. You should only listen to Fox News. This is the message that they're putting out. I mean, this is poison. I expect this battle to really pick up. Rita in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Rita, what's up?
Hi, I just want to vent because my daughter and my granddaughter are nurses. My granddaughter is working on a floor that's nothing but these patients that are dying, that can't see their families. And then you've got Sean Hannity saying, this is okay, let's go back. Rush Limbaugh, let's go back to work. They're putting my family's life at risk and other families' life at risk. This is insanity, and it's got to stop. We need a change so bad. I'm telling you, I can't wait till this orange man is out of office. He's been nothing but, he's just a horrible, horrible man. And everyone that backs him, which I even have family members that do, I think it's terrible. And thanks for letting me vent. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Rita, it's a good one. I mean, I totally empathize. 2 of my kids are frontline healthcare workers, and the third is the chief public health official for a county just up the road from here. And Louise and I are very worried about them. You must be scared to death about your granddaughter in particular.
Yeah, I'm scared to death. But I'm telling you, the normal people, the people that are kind and bleeding heart liberal like I am, they're sending food to my granddaughter and my daughter, and they're doing all they can for the nurses, which is wonderful because these nurses not only have to take care of these patients, but they have to console them because they don't have their loved ones with them. It's just this is a terrible, terrible thing, and this Dr. Sean Hannity is the biggest joke around. So thank you, Tom.
It's very unfortunate. Rita, thank you for the call, and I'm glad we could provide you with an opportunity to vent, and hopefully, a few million people got the message. Whew, amazing. Well, we're going to continue here rolling along on our program. Stick around. Dahr Jamail is going to be with us. It's going to be fascinating.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Measuring What Counts, the Global Movement for Well-Being by Joe Stiglitz, Jean-Paul Fatoussi, and Martine Dahr. And this is from the first chapter labeled Overview. The high-level expert group on the measurement of economic performance and social progress, also known as HLEG, builds on the analyses and recommendations of the 2009 Commission on the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress, also known as the Stiglitz-Sen-Fatoussi Commission, in highlighting the role of well-being metrics in policy and encouraging a more active dialogue among economic theory and statistical practice. The report makes explicit the often implicit assumptions hidden in statistical practices and their real-world consequences. Its central message is that what we measure affects what we do. If we measure the wrong thing, we will do the wrong thing. If we don't measure something, it becomes neglected, as if the problem didn't exist. There is no simple way of representing every aspect of well-being in a single number in the way GDP describes market economic output. This has led to GDP being used as a proxy for both economic welfare, like people's command over commodities, and general welfare, which also depends on people's attributes and non-market activities. GDP was not designed for this task. We need to move beyond GDP when assessing a country's health and complement GDP with a broader dashboard of indicators that would reflect the distribution of well-being in society and its sustainability across the social, economic, and environmental dimensions. The challenge is to make the dashboard small enough to be easily comprehensible, but large enough to summarize what we care about the most. The 2008 crisis and its aftermath illustrate why a change in perspective is needed. The GDP loss that followed the crisis was not the temporary one-off event predicted by conventional macroeconomic models. Its effects have lasted over time, suggesting that the crisis caused the permanent loss of significant amounts of capital, not just machines and structures, but also hidden capital in the form of lower on-the-job training, permanent scars on young people entering the labor market during a recession, and lower trust in an economic system rigged to benefit a few. Different metrics, including better measurements of people's economic insecurity, could have shown that the consequences of the recession were much deeper than the GDP statistics indicated, and governments might have responded more strongly to mitigate the negative impacts of the crisis. If, on the basis of GDP, the economy is perceived to be well on the road to recovery, as many governments believed in 2010, one would not take the strong policy measures needed to support people's living conditions suggested by metrics that inform on whether most of the population still feels in recession. Nor would one take measures to bolster the safety net and social protection in the absence of metrics on the extent of people's economic insecurity. These failings in the policy responses to the crisis were compounded by overly focusing on the consequences of public spending and raising government's liabilities, when this spending could take the form of investment, increasing the assets in governments and countries' balance sheets. The same follows when measures of unemployment do not reflect the full extent of a country's unused labor resources. The beyond GDP agenda is sometimes characterized as anti-growth, but this is not the case. The use of a dashboard of indicators reflecting what we value as a society would have led, most likely, to stronger GDP growth than that actually achieved by most countries after 2008. This book also looks at progress in implementing the recommendations of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fatoussi Commission since 2009, identifying areas that require increased focus by statistical agencies, researchers, and policymakers. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, agreed by the international community in 2015, clearly go far beyond GDP. But their 169 policy targets and more than 200 indicators for global monitoring are too many to guide policies. Countries will have to identify their priorities within the broader UN agenda and upgrade their statistical capacities, which, even in developed countries, are insufficient to monitor whether the agreed-upon commitments are being met. The international community should invest in upgrading the statistical capacity of developing countries, especially in areas where country data are needed to assess global phenomena, such as climate change or the world distribution of income. Inequality in income and wealth has today a central role in policy discussions in ways it did not in 2009. But important progress is still needed in a range of areas, such as measuring what happens at both ends of the income distribution, integrating different data sources, and measuring the joint distribution of income, consumption, and wealth at the individual level. When looking at inequality, it's also important to look at differences between groups. These are called horizontal inequalities, at inequalities within households, and the way resources are shared and managed, which are especially important in the case of wealth. We should also look beyond inequality in outcomes to inequality of opportunity. Inequality of opportunity is even more unacceptable than inequality of outcomes, but the operational distinction between the two is fuzzy, as we don't observe all circumstances that shape people's outcomes and are independent of their efforts. The book Measuring What Counts by Joe Stiglitz and friends. Thank you. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you. This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Dahr, the independent journalist and staff reporter over at Truthout. We had him on about his book, The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption. He has a new book out, or soon to be out. It's titled The Changing Earth. The website is thechangingearth.net. Dahr Jamail, of course, you can tweet him at DAHRJAMAIL. And the subtitle for The Changing Earth is Indigenous Voices in Turtle Island. Dahr, welcome back to the program. Tell us about your book.
Well, thanks, Tom. It's always good to be with you. And the book is essentially picking up, and actually we are just in the initial stages of it. We have started work on it, me and my co-author, Stan Rushworth, who is an Indigenous elder and teacher. And we basically picked up where I left off in The End of Ice, where, you know, we're in this climate crisis, and then now with COVID-19 and everything that's upon us now, all of these converging crises, how are we to be during this time, and how are we to keep trying to be of service on the earth during all these converging crises? And essentially the book takes the tact of, well, Indigenous people, specifically in the U.S. and Canada, who have already lived through a sort of their own apocalypse, including being diseased intentionally by the U.S. government and genocide carried out against them, and all of the things that has happened to them and continue to happen to them. Well, these people have an intense amount of wisdom to share with all of us now about how we might best situate ourselves internally and externally during these times.
Wow, that's a big order. I know in your book, The End of Ice, you talk about amplification, about what happens when methane, and by the way, methane levels are spiking right now, and it's not because of industrial activity, it's apparently because the poles are melting and permafrost is thawing, it's releasing methane. And that's got a lot of scientists really, really freaked out. We could, as we watch, as the coronavirus goes from, okay, you got 5 infections, now you've got 50 infections, now you have 500 infections, now you have 5,000 infections, now you have 50,000, and pretty soon you have 500,000. And that's where we're at, by the way, as a nation right now, over 500,000 infections, more than any other country on earth. that same math, that same logarithmic math, can apply to alterations in the climate as well. As I recall, I believe you point that out in your book, The End of Ice. So if that's the case, we're going to be looking not just at this crisis with the coronavirus, but we're going to be looking at we already are to some extent, with melting permafrost and wildfires and wild storms and things, but we're going to look at exponentially worse weather, some more severe weather and things like that. So A, reality check that, and then B, what lessons can we learn from Indigenous people about how to respond to these kinds of crises?
Well, that's what you shared about the climate is exactly right. I'm, of course, continuing to track it, given, what was in the End of Ice and how much more rapidly everything is unfolding than it was even when I wrote that book, which was just published a year ago. And it's just literally today a report came out and showed Greenland had a record year of melting in 2019. And, of course, now everything is ahead of schedule, including the thawing of the permafrost, which one of the scientists I interviewed for The End of Ice, Vladimir Romanovsky, a leading expert on permafrost and its thawing, co-authored a report this fall that came out and showed we're 70 years ahead of schedule with the thawing, that they didn't expect it to be at the point it is right now for another 70 years. And that just continues to accelerate. So I think it's buckle up time with all fronts on the climate crisis. And then now going into this summer where we're certainly going to have extreme events like wildfires. We've even seen the historic tornadoes in the southeast just last week, and rising sea levels, and of course probably an intensified hurricane season again, and then against the backdrop of this pandemic. So what are you going to do with climate refugees? It's really getting into an extreme situation on top of the economic crisis. And so, and then with all of that going on, this is a situation that Native Americans, just talking specifically about this country, they've lived through this, minus the extreme weather events, but economic deprivation, extreme poverty, and intentional genocide against them, the spreading of infected blankets against them using literally biological warfare, and, in some places in the country seeing over a 90% reduction in population, like in California, in a 25-year period. That is so extreme to imagine, and they are still here, and they have managed to find a way to maintain their traditions and cultural practices through all of that, and they are still here. And then now they are the ones that so many people are going back to and seeking what's referred to as TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and going back to these people that this government had tried to decimate for years. And it's because what they do works, that they've lived through all of these extreme times in this country that have been brought upon them, and they're still here, and they're still managing to live close to the earth and teach people things like we saw in California in the wake of the wildfires last summer of, look, here's what you need to do to actually maintain and manage forests. This is what we did long before you people came here. And we're seeing that happening here and in Canada and in places like Australia, where people that actually already were living that way with the earth in certain areas of Australia, for example, during their last summer of extreme wildfires, it didn't burn. And those were some of the only places in the regions that saw the worst wildfires where it literally didn't burn. So those are just a couple of examples.
So let's make this a little more practical and a little more at the level of the individual who might be watching or listening to this program right now. Forest management is a marvelous thing, and Indigenous wisdom on that is great, but what would Indigenous communities tell us about how to create community during a time of crisis like this, or how to keep your family together, or how to survive in a time of crisis?
Well, it literally is essentially doing that. And now with this, the lockdowns that we're all experiencing here on the West Coast, it's we're being forced into community. And so this is, as Stan Rushworth is my co-author's name, and as he and I are talking about this regularly and what he's seeing across indigenous populations where he has so many contacts and friends, is that's how, for example, people have always been living on reservations, and they've been forced to, and you come to rely upon each other out of necessity. And that's what I think, many people here, including myself, are already experiencing now, where, look, I have my community where I live, and I'm reaching out to my neighbors, and they're reaching out to me. How can we get through this together? Does anybody need anything? Looking out for older folks who it's more risky for them to go to stores, so I'm going to go for them. That kind of thing, literally just living and working and caring for each other, whether we're blood related or simply just neighbors or friends. And that's a perfect example, and I think a lot of us are experiencing this right now. And the amazing thing is this is how we should have always been living with the earth anyway, and it's how indigenous people, for the most part, have always been living with the earth anyway. First because it was the right way of doing so with the planet before the industrial revolution occurred and spread across the planet. And now it's becoming out of necessity once again, forced upon us by this pandemic and the economic crisis, both of which are just getting warmed up here. So it comes back around to knowing your locality, knowing what's here, being well-resourced within that with your neighbors.
Right. And it's not just living with the earth, it's living with each other, which I think is the point you're making. Dahr Jamail, the new book will be The Changing Earth, the website thechangingearth.net, THE, changingearth.net, and you can tweet him at Dahr Jamail. Dahr, thanks for dropping by. It's great talking with you, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with the book. I wish you the very best. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, Susan, and in Alachua, Florida.
Alachua.
Am I saying that right, Susan? Hey, what's up?
Alachua, yes. There are people in North Korea or Korea who have been reinfected with this virus. So unless there is some kind of a serum to keep people from getting reinfected, I don't think that there's ever going to be something that, people got infected and then they can go off and not be reinfected again and go to a job and do whatever they're going to do. They're going to get reinfected.
Well, these people, Susan, you're talking about, I think, 8 people in South Korea that have had this, or maybe it was 11 people out of millions and millions and millions of people. And the question at this point, because the test is very invasive, you've got to shove a swab not just into somebody's nose, but through their nose up into their skull, into their sinuses, in order to get a sample, a good enough sample. And because and people jerk back and sneeze and all kinds of stuff when that happens, it's why the people doing the tests have to have full face, shields on and things like that. And so because of that, there's substantial suspicion that those people were not reinfected, that they simply had false negative tests because the tests weren't performed right, or that, it may be that this virus hangs on a little longer than we thought. It might be a few extra weeks or a few extra months. So, but there doesn't seem to be evidence yet, and again, this is all evolving, that this would be like, the diseases that, like the spirochete diseases, like Lyme disease, where it hides out in your joints and then pops back to life, months or years later. There's, to the best of my knowledge, no evidence of that. So the question, though, is how long the immunity lasts. And one of the things we're going to find out, there's numerous big studies being done on this in several different countries, where they're taking the blood, the serum, the blood, the clear part of the blood from people who have had the disease, and they're injecting it into people who have the disease because it contains the antibodies. And they're also finding that in their virus experiments, in their vaccine experiments, that when they inject people with fragments of the spike protein, the protein on the outer surface of the coronavirus cell, that are these are the spikes that link into the angiotensin receptor sites on cells, which are, in huge numbers on lung cells and, blood vessels, basically, but particularly in the lungs, one of the most vascularized parts of the whole entire body. That when they inject broken fragments of these proteins into people's skins, the body produces a very, very strong antibody response, and that's a good thing. That indicates that a vaccine may be possible. Question is, how rapidly is this virus going to mutate? Is it going to, will there be seasonal mutations like there are with the common cold or with influenza? We just don't know the answers to those questions yet. But I think the idea that somebody who tested positive then tested negative and is weeks or months after they've long been symptom free could then again become contagious, that is not yet something that science is accepting. Those are purely largely anecdotal cases, and they're the outliers. We'll be back.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Some of the leading headlines around the country: the Washington Post, Schumer and Democratic Senators Patty Murray, Debbie Stabenow, Dick Durbin argued that the Trump administration needs to expand testing to give Americans the confidence to go back to work and resume their normal lives. Yes, testing is the key to the whole thing. Axios, Senate Democratic leadership announced Wednesday a plan authored by Senator Patty Murray, she's from Washington State, that calls for $30 billion in emergency funds to bolster national coronavirus testing and contact tracing. The Seattle Times saying the same thing. Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, a lot of these stories now, pushing this. The New York Times, this roundup is remarkable. Chuck Schumer's office just pushed this out. The New York Times, testing falls woefully short as Trump seeks to end stay-at-home orders. See, he can't have it both ways. He can't say, hey guys, I'd like you to go back out there and visit my hotels and my golf courses, which of course is the source of his anguish. He can't say, come to my hotel and golf course, and at the same time say, but we're not going to let you know if you have the coronavirus or if you had the coronavirus or if my employees have had the coronavirus, or it's just, you can't have it both ways. If you look at what's happening, this is a remarkable story published over in Huffington Post. Dateline Singapore. At around 4 p.m., this woman teaches in a yoga studio, or goes to a yoga studio. She says, around 4 p.m. on March 26th, a Thursday, I got a text message from the yoga studio where I moonlight as a part-time instructor. A student had tested positive for coronavirus. Within the hour, a ministry representative conducting contact tracing for coronavirus cases called my cell phone. After I told her about some shortness of breath that I experienced in the prior 2 days, an ambulance was immediately dispatched to my home and I was whisked to the National Center for Infectious Diseases to be tested for COVID-19. By 8:30 p.m., my chest had been x-rayed, nose swabs to test for the coronavirus administered, and a brief exam by an ER doc completed. Now, she also had asthma, and when the test results came back, they were negative. They basically said, yeah, she's got asthma. But she writes, my experience is typical of someone potentially exposed to the coronavirus in Singapore. In the early days of the pandemic, Singapore had among the world's highest number of COVID-19 cases. But 3 months into the outbreak here, she writes, Singapore's numbers remain relatively low. Singapore, with a population of 6 million, which is about the same as the 7 million in Washington State, has only 3,700 people infected and only 10 deaths. Washington State, on the other hand, has 10,700 infected and 567 deaths. New York, 200,000 cases and 11,000 deaths. Now, these numbers are from her article. They may be out of date now. But she says, the BBC reported in March that 40% of positive coronavirus cases in Singapore were identified because of contact tracing efforts. That phone call that she got. And now we have Mayor Breed in San Francisco and Governor Baker in, Mayor Breed is a Democrat, Governor Baker is a Republican in Massachusetts, both instituting contact tracing programs for the city of San Francisco and the state of Massachusetts, respectively. She writes, if you test positive for the virus here in Singapore, you're immediately hospitalized and isolated. You're then kept sequestered at either a hospital or a dedicated quarantine facility until multiple tests for COVID-19 all come up negative. And all this on the government's dime. Doesn't cost you a penny. We're getting all these reports now of people who show up at ERs to get tested, and whether they test negative or positive, they go home and they get a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 bill in the mail. Surprise testing. Prime Minister Lee of Singapore went on live television and, well, actually this was on Fareed Zakaria's show. He said, we're transparent. If there's bad news, we tell you. If there are things which need to be done, we also tell you. And people all over the world are praising Lee for, basically getting ahead of this. The guy from Singapore. And South Korea is doing this. Germany is doing this. I shared that story with you earlier. And now the New York Times reporting that 90% of the deaths in the United States would not have happened if Donald Trump had shut the country down 2 weeks before New York and California did, or New York and the Bay Area. Just in those 2 weeks, we would, instead of having 30,000 dead people, we'd have 3,000 dead people. Instead of having 600,000 infected people, we'd have 60,000 infected people. Meanwhile, Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, posted a tweet last night. I saw this tweet and I hit the translate button. I was like, whoa. This is his tweet. I'm very happy to talk to my old friend Wang Yi, the Chinese state counselor and foreign minister again. We exchanged views on issues of common interest such as fighting the new crown pneumonia epidemic, deepening the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two countries, and the peace process in Afghanistan. I thank China for providing Iran with anti-epidemic materials and sending medical experts, condemning the continued illegal sanctions by the United States that severely hindered Iran's efforts to fight the epidemic. Donald Trump has pushed Iran into China's arms. You'll recall Barack Obama had actually worked out essentially a peace, a truce with Iran. And, they submitted to a testing regime. They were moving down the road to opening their society, to acknowledging Israel, to peace. Barack Obama worked this out, and Donald Trump blew the whole damn thing up and has now thrown the Iranians into the arms of the Chinese. So much for American leadership in the world, right? Well, from a president who doesn't believe in leadership and doesn't believe in America. He believes in fascism, basically. He thinks the fat cat should run everything and the big corporations should run the government. And that's why many of his high offices within the administration are staffed by lobbyists. The guy who runs the EPA, former coal industry lobbyist. The guy who runs the Interior Department, former oil industry lobbyist. I mean, he's got lobbyists all over the place. It's crony capitalism at its very worst. And now on top of that, he's just destroyed. 3 years of the Trump administration have destroyed America's reputation around the world. It's going to take us a decade or more to get that back, if we can. China's stepping into the vacuum that we're leaving behind. We'll pick up your phone calls after the break. It's coming up on 28
You're
minutes
listening
past
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where smart people get their news. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Our book today is by Catherine Bailey. It's A Castle in Wartime. One family, their missing sons, and the fight to defeat the Nazis. It's an extraordinary and fascinating book. This is from the prologue. Dateline Innsbruck, Austria, 16 December 1944. Monica calling steamboat. This cryptic announcement, broadcast to Austria over the Voice of America, was received with relief by a handful of people able to decipher it. The coded message signaled that the Allies were still trying to infiltrate agents into Innsbruck to make contact with members of the Austrian resistance. It was 7 o'clock on a winter's morning, the gray old city walled in by snow-covered mountains. A roof of dense cloud hung over the domes and spires, cutting out the sky on the summit of the Nordkette. Towering 7,000 feet above the city, the sheer face of the mountain rose like a wall, blocking the north end of the fine Baroque streets. The illusion of being confined in a small space was maintained in the alleys and passageways in the medieval quarter. On a chill, gloomy day such as this, passing the tall, narrow-fronted Gothic houses, the sensation was of walking along the bottom of a ravine. Thick wreaths of smoke spiraled beneath the clouds. The day before, American planes had bombed the city, killing 259 people. In Herzog-Friedrichstrasse, a protective shroud covered the famous golden roof of the balcony designed for Emperor Maximilian in 1500. Beneath the bombed-out buildings, parties of children, drafted in from the villages along the valley, worked to clear the rubble. They were watched by small groups of SS soldiers who stood on the street corners guarding the defusing crews. Forcibly recruited from the nearby concentration camp at Reichenau, it was their job to deactivate the bombs that had failed to explode. The Allies were now convinced that Innsbruck, rather than the Reich capital of Berlin, was where the war was likely to culminate. Recent intelligence reports indicated that Hitler was building an Apfelfestung, an Alpine fortress, Alpenfestung, in the mountains that encircled the city. Blueprints obtained by OSS operatives, the OSS is the forerunner of the CIA, point to a chain of underground factories and armories. It was to this remote, impregnable fortress that Hitler and a coterie of his most fanatical supporters intended to retreat when the Wehrmacht was beaten. From here, they would carry on the fight, defended by elite SS troops and sustained by huge stores of supplies that had been carefully stockpiled in bomb-proof caves. With Hitler holding the high ground, Allied military commanders were predicting that the battle to take the fortress could extend the war by up to 2 years and exact more casualties than all of the previous fighting on the Western Front. In these circumstances, intelligence from Innsbruck, the capital of the Apfelfestung, was suddenly at a premium. Alan Dulles, the OSS station chief in Switzerland, hoped to recruit a network of agents from within the city. Their job would be to supply hard military intelligence and assist the passage of U.S. and British forces when they reached the western border of Austria. But as Dulles recognized, Innsbruck was not fertile ground. That autumn, the Gestapo had arrested all known anti-Nazis. Moving from house to house, the mopping up operation signaled their determination to suppress all resistance operations in an area they looked upon as their last bastion. Soon after midday on 16 December, the U.S. Air Force returned to bomb the city for the fourth time that month. A sharp left rally was executed immediately. After bombs away and a course flown around Innsbruck, the pilot reported. Due to undercast, no visual observation of results were possible. Some hours later, Frau Muttenschuldner, a resident of 47 years, sat down to write in her diary. "It is a black day for Innsbruck," she began. "The old city center has been hit, as well as the graveyard. Everyone feared there would be another raid, and sure enough, the enemy bombers came and wreaked their evil. There was no gas or water in the city, and the cemetery was now closed for burials. In the flat, dingy light, the only color was from the fires that had yet to be put out. Fraulein Kummer's photo studio is on fire," Frau Muttenschuldner reported. Vargar's paper warehouse, the stained glass factory at Müllerstrasse, Café Paul in Maximilianstrasse, and Hallensteiner's Gasthaus are all burning. Showers of sparks and burning paper are falling from the warehouse. One would marvel at the eerie beauty of it if it were not such a sad occasion. The raid marked a change of tactic. In addition to dropping 200 tons of bombs, the U.S. planes had dropped thousands of propaganda leaflets. In the coming weeks, they would drop thousands more. These, and the messages broadcast on the BBC's Austrian service, urged the city's inhabitants to rise up and prevent Hitler from making a last stand in the Tyrol. "Tyroleans, we know that you will not permit it. You will see to it that none of the Nazi leaders can hide. We know that already Tyroleans are fighting the Nazis everywhere. Even if the Nazis still feel secure in your country, we know better. You are on our side. But the vast majority of Tyroleans were not on the Allies' side. The book, A Castle in Wartime.
Coming up on this week's Science Revolution is Zach Corrigan with Food and Water Watch. Could another zoonotic pandemic be coming? Thomas Lindsay with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights is here on the rights of nature and how they may have kept Pennsylvania from industry harm. And Friends of the Earth, Lucas Ross is dropping by on the big oil bailout and how fracking could be next. Plus, Arthur West with the Washington League for Increased Transparency and Ethics is suing Fox So-Called News for endangering Americans by calling the coronavirus a hoax. Can he win? The Science Revolution is available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting live from Portland, Oregon, and Aaron in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind today?
Hi, John. How you doing?
Good, Tom.
But nobody ever talks about this. But back in January, when China was building these massive hospitals, and they got it within a week. They built these massive hospitals. I mean, that was a red flag back then. It's like, it's coming here.
You would think, yeah. I mean, we now know that in November, spy agencies, U.S. spy agencies were communicating to the federal government, there is something going on here. It looks like it might be like SARS. We need to be paying careful attention to this. And then in December, the spy agencies were yelling at Donald Trump, at the Trump administration, this is happening. And then on December 31st, the Chinese government acknowledged it, and within a week, they had published the decoded genome of the virus. In another week, you had Germany, and the World Health Organization had come up with testing kits, and they were starting to push them out. There was a German manufacturer that was pushing them out. Now we're into the third week of January to 60 different countries around the world. And all through that, even though the alarm bells were going off inside the Pentagon, the alarm bells were going off inside the National Security Council, just like they were in 2001 about Osama bin Laden, where George Bush, when he spent the longest vacation in the history of the American presidency down in Texas, and I think he was hiding out because he was afraid that they were going to strike Washington, D.C., and he didn't want to get taken out. He was afraid they were going to hit the White House. That's my personal opinion. He was hiding out in his house, and so the CIA sent somebody to him with that August 6th memo. Bin Laden determined to strike inside the U.S. And what did he do then? He fled his house to Florida, where his brother was governor, who immediately created a state of emergency and essentially locked down Florida. And that's where Bush was when 9/11 happened. He knew it was coming, and he was trying to flee it. He was trying to ignore it. Trump is doing the exact same thing. This is what Republicans do. They don't take science seriously. They don't take warnings seriously. You got the great crash in 1929 on Herbert Hoover, Republican Herbert Hoover's, President Herbert Hoover's watch. You got the 1987 crash, the second worst crash on Ronald Reagan's watch, including the SNL meltdown. You get the third worst crash on George W. Bush's watch in 2008 with the so-called recession, the Republican banking recession. And now we've got another Republican president, and we've got our fourth crash. Gee, what a shock. Mike in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've got a bunch of Republican friends that are, they're always, when there's a Democrat in the White House, it's always states' rights are more important than anything. But when there's a Republican in the White House, it's the federal government. The federal government's in control of everything. I mean, I had a friend that called me this morning. He's from Michigan. He said, yeah, our dictator's got us on lockdown. I said, why aren't you guys down in Ohio complaining about the wine? He's a Republican. He's got everybody on lockdown down there. Why aren't they down there complaining? They're not complaining. They're not complaining in Ohio, but because Gretchen Whitmer is a Democrat, that's why they're doing this. They're such hypocrites. It's not even funny. I mean, when Obama was in the White House, it was all about states' rights. The federal government can't tell you what to do. Now you got Dotard in the White House, and he controls everything, and they have no problem with that whatsoever. It's just incredible to me that they're dumb enough they just can't see that. I just don't understand it. Thanks.
I think they do see it. I think they do understand it, and I think that what you're seeing is my team versus your team. I mean, we've seen this with team sports, for example, where a player on a team gets busted for rape, for example. That's the more common one, or even something less than that, driving drunk or something. And everybody rallies to the team, right? Oh no, he's not that bad. He's our player. And people who are not fans of that team or don't live in that town, they're like, what? Throw the bum out or throw him in jail. It's the same thing. It's my tribe versus your tribe. It's a tribal team mentality that is being played out. And the problem that we have is that you have the billionaire class, by and large, most of the conservative billionaires in the United States are very active in supporting the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and have been since the 1970s. And, the result is that normal partisanship becomes hyper-partisanship, and it becomes toxic partisanship. And that's where we're at, and that's what you're describing. Karen in St. Albans, New York. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Great. I've driven through St. Albans more than once. Great to have you with us.
Oh, great. Thank you. I was calling because I have a mother who is 90. She has SNAP benefits. I'm also in an age group where I'm not supposed to go outside either. When you go to try and get food deliveries, the only options I have are Walmart, which is pickup, Amazon, which the wait list as of 2 weeks ago was at the end of May, and some other grocery who also couldn't provide. So I just wanted to ask you if you could speak with Congressman Pocan or any other politician to find out if anything is being done so that people on SNAP can get food deliveries. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now, I have to go outside to get food, and I'm terrified.
Yeah, I get it. And this is a problem, and it's one that hasn't been accounted for. The SNAP is also what people commonly call food stamps, for people who don't know what you're talking about, Karen. And,
yes.
It's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is what the acronym stands for. And that is a serious problem. And I don't know what to tell you, other than that, yes, I will try to remember to bring that up the next time we have Congressman Khanna or Congresswoman Jayapal or Congressman Pocan on the program, or any other politician who deigns to come on.
There are going to be more people on SNAP now. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and this has to be fixed. The one thing, just a flag, that I would share with you, St. Albans, as I recall, is a fairly small town. We used to drive through there on the way up from Vermont, from Montpelier, Vermont, up to Canada, as I recall. Am I right? Am I remembering where you are?
No, I'm in the New York City area.
Oh, okay. Then I'm mixing it up with something else. But in any case, one of the things that I have discovered here in Oregon is that several of the food co-ops in this town are alive and well and conducting business. They'll bring your food out to the parking lot, and some of them do delivery, but they're not connected to the big click cart or whatever it's called, Snap Cart. There's a delivery service that's a big deal, and they're not connected to Amazon, which is doing it mostly through Whole Foods, which they own. And so you might want to, let your fingers do some walking through food vendors, grocery vendors who may still be open and may not have a 2-week wait. Now, that may or may not help you with SNAP benefits. I'm guessing some of them will take SNAP benefits, but maybe they can figure out a way to do it. I don't know, but I wish you the very best, Karen. I'm sorry to hear.
Yeah, I just thought it was important because other people may soon be in the same position.
Yeah, and it would be nice to fix it for you and your mom, particularly, for sure. Karen, thank you for the call. Roland in Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Roland, we got a minute and a half to the break. What's up?
Thank you very much. Is my volume okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. So you're so right. This is a cusp. From now on, the 2020 pandemic is going to be the change that everybody's going to reflect on. It's a watershed between corporate future, which is like a golden era for a Nazi concept of young people, strong and that, or the other one, which is pro-people. And I'm a hippie. I'm 81 years old, a Vietnam vet, one of the original hippies. And we want to create society as if people matter. And so that's the other side of this, which could be the next step, which is hazardous duty pay for everybody, including Uber drivers and stalkers and people at the grocery store. And it should be all volunteers. If you don't want to work at the grocery store and you feel like you're in danger, you should be able to stay home with full pay. And the piece that you mentioned yesterday is government can print money. And this is so important because we need to back up the health of all these people. And so then the other part is...
I'm with you, Roland. The way that we're seeing this play out is that people are starting to unionize. They're starting to have strikes. And I expect to see a lot more of this. I agree with you. These people are on the front lines. We've got a sign on our front door that says, dear delivery person, thank you for being on the front lines. You can just leave it, unless you need a signature. No need to ring the bell. We need to honor these folks.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And make sure that they're well paid. It's just crazy that people are working minimum wage in contact with the public. It's just wrong. And welcome back. Dondi in Seattle. Hey, Dondi, what's up?
Hello, Mr. Hartmann. Pleasure to speak with you. Long-time listener.
Thank you.
I was just, I've recently had the opportunity to watch Fox News, and I bump over there occasionally to see what's going on. I was recently added to my TV programming. Anyway, I was caught a little bit of Sean Hannity, and, I can only take about 5 minutes before I have to shut him off. But I wanted to hear from one of the Michigan protesters that he's going to have in his next segment, so I stuck around and listened. And I was quite caught off guard. It sounded like extremely draconian the way she was describing the lockdown by Governor Whitmer Gretchen Whitmer. And people couldn't go out in their motorboats on their lake. They couldn't go to their lake cabins. They couldn't go hunting or fishing or any of that. It sounded, a little crazy. So it was keeping me up all night, and I had to look it up this morning. And from what I can see from the EO 2020-42 of the governors is that I'm assuming you can go out in your kayak, single-person boats, that the lady that was on from Michigan portrayed as a liberal sport activity. And then you can go to your lake cabin. Well, I'm assuming you can go to your lake cabin, but you can't go to campgrounds where people are going to congregate. And the thing about the boating, you can be out in a boat with your family, maybe 2 people. So everything was just misinformation and something about, sporting activities. Well, of course you can't go to a range because you're going to be putting people in danger that have to work there. Of course, you can't get a license for hunting or fishing if you don't already have one because, again, you're going to have people having to serve you to give you those licenses. But it just all seemed like a whole bunch of misinformation.
Well, that's what you get on Fox News. You get heavy slant and selective data, and this is the way that Fox News has been lying to its people ever since it was created back in the 90s, as I recall. And this is something Limbaugh has been doing since he started in '87. This is the only way that right-wing media can succeed and sustain itself, is by lying to its people. I pointed out day before yesterday, I mistakenly said that Montana had a Republican governor, and I had dozens of people on Twitter literally shouting at me, one of them calling me fake news, saying, "No, it's Steve Bullock, he's a Democrat." And it's like, that's how rare it is that I get something wrong on this show, and I go out of my way to make sure that it's fact-based. You hear Rachel Maddow say, "Tell me if I said anything wrong," to her sources. It's almost become tiresome to hear her say it, but it's like, those of us in the real world are actually concerned about truth and about reality and checking facts and making accurate statements, particularly when you know that people are going to repeat them. On Fox News and on right-wing hate radio, that's very much not the case. Their job, this is propaganda. Their job is to cause people to believe and behave in a particular way, regardless of its connection to reality. And that's now what Donald Trump is doing every day with his Trump rallies on TV. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the end. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980, and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it, and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Aaron in Minneapolis. Hey, Aaron, thanks for listening to KTNF. What's up?
Oh, hey, Tom. Hey, I just wanted to follow up on there was a caller before that had called in about getting the funding. She was a caterer who got her SBA payroll protection plan loan funded and had some concerns about it. And my payroll protection just came in today as well, and I spoke with my banker, and the information that I got was different. What I learned was that they're going to base it on a head count on how many employees that you had prior to January 31st, and that the amount that would be forgiven would be based on the percentage that's equal to how many employees that you hire back on. There's no restrictions, just FYI, about hiring the same people back either. Like if you decided that you needed like a media person to help you advertise your company, you could do that instead of hiring like somebody, that you had on before. And that there's no mention of in any of the regulations that he could see, my banker, that mentioned anything about fraud. It was just simply that if you didn't use them, say the 25% that's allocated for mortgage or interest rate or interest on rent or whatever those stipulations were, that it simply would just be you had to pay that money back at 1%. And he was saying the bank that I went through, they are a big commercial bank, and he said that their average loan is $12 million. Their average, so he wasn't used to working with like small businesses and stuff like that. But he said that they funded a bunch of those big loans, and said that most of the big companies that were getting big amounts of dollars early on were using the money to pay off their lines of credit. All of it. They just took the whole thing to pay down their lines of credit, and they're like, "Hey, it's a 1% loan," and that's how they're looking at it. So I would.
So they know they're going to have to pay it back. I mean, her concern was that if she didn't hire back the same number of people by June 1st, that she was going to have to pay back the whole $100,000, or at least the $75,000 of it that was for employees.
That's not how I understand it.
You're not seeing that provision?
Nope, I'm not seeing that at all. And
have you looked at an actual contract yet, Aaron, or are you just going on what your banker told you on the phone?
Well, he forwarded me the guidelines that they're using from the SBA. He just downloaded it this morning, so it's current as of this morning, and there was no mention of any of that. When I addressed that with him, he just said that, no, they're just looking at the 2 months that you're going to be using these funds to pay payroll, and then whatever percentage you didn't use based on the head counts, not even based on how much money you did. So say you used the entire loan, but you used it for 2 employees where before you had 10, they would look at that as whatever the percentage of 2 employees is, 20%, that's how much they would forgive. And then there was nothing in the terms that
that's essentially what she was saying. She's got a catering business, and odds are, even though June is a very, very big month for that, all these weddings and things, odds are it ain't going to be happening. So on June 1st, she's probably not going to be hiring back maybe anybody, and
or on July
which means
1st,
she's going to have to pay back the whole thing.
No, that's not true. What you would do is you would owe 1% interest on the funds that you didn't use for that. And if you used your whole $100,000 on payroll, if you used it on payroll for those 2 months, that it would be forgiven. So as far as I can tell, that is not correct. That I think where the misunderstanding.
So she needs to go back and check the details.
And I think we all maybe do before we spend the money right away. But my banker did tell me that all of his big clients took the money and immediately just paid down their lines of credit. And we're like, good.
Right, because they got a line of credit of 4% and they're getting government money at 1%, but they're just viewing it as a loan. But for a small business, what small business that's on the verge of going out of business right now anyway is going to want to add a $100,000 debt burden to their company, particularly if it's a sole proprietorship where they will personally be on the hook for that.
But the point is that those companies weren't using it for payroll. But if you use it for payroll, it's forgivable.
It's forgivable that's assuming though that you hire those people back.
Your staff back at the end of it.
Yeah.
Then you owe no.
Okay.
So that's
Aaron, we've all got to learn. We've all got to learn more about this. But thank you for that. It's fascinating. I appreciate the call. Michael in San Carlos, California. Michael, we have 1 minute to the end of the show. You got a quick story to tell us?
Yeah, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. I just wanted to kind of back up your story with regard to the Singapore healthcare system. I have a mother-in-law who lives in Singapore, has been there for her entire life. In fact, she was there during the Japanese internment back in the World War II. Whoa. But that said, she's 90-plus years old. And the government actually provided her, and I'm not sure how many others, but elderly people, masks over a month ago in a move to go ahead and prevent the spread amongst the populace. The testing is available and made available at no cost to citizens. In fact, yesterday, this is just kind of an added bonus, but she actually had somebody come by her house, a nurse, to do an annual checkup for her. And this is the kind of service that they're receiving there from the standpoint of health care for their senior citizens.
Right. Yeah, they have a good, extensive, efficient, free, 100% free healthcare system in Singapore, as they do in most developed countries around the world. We're the village idiots. You're glad to hear that, Michael.
If you walk into any of their hospitals, they're first rate. They are absolutely 100% better than 99% of everything we have out here.
Yeah, I believe it. Michael, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and I appreciate the validation of one of our stories. It ain't fake news. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get involved, right? Wake people up. Spread the good word. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. And tell your friends and neighbors and social media friends how to find good progressive media.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!